Hello. Okay. Are we about ready? Got everyone here? Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to this virtual council meeting of Norwich City Council. This meeting is being held under the local authorities and police and crime panels coronavirus flexibility of local authorities and police crime panel meetings England and Wales regulations 2020, meaning that decisions made will have the same validity as those made at the meeting at City Hall. We have elected members of the council attending the meeting. We also have the council's officer as part of the meeting, as well as democratic services staff to record votes. Members must be able to hear and, where practical, see other members. Therefore, we ask all members to keep their video on during the meeting. A recording of this meeting will appear on the council's YouTube channel. At the meeting, it will be live streamed. If we are notified that this link is not working, we will take a short adjournment while the issue is resolved. Can I ask participants to ensure that they are muted when not speaking? You may be muted by an officer to maintain audio quality. The chat function is enabled for members to report technical difficulties and to indicate that they would like to speak on an item, but you will only be able to message the chair and democratic services. If you wish to speak on an item, please use the chat function to indicate during the item. Do not indicate via chat functions for future items. Voting for items on the corporate plan and the council tax reduction scheme will be done by exception. This means that I will ask for votes against, then abstentions, and the remainder of the vote, the members present will therefore be voting in favour. Although I will still ask you to raise your hand in favour. Ask at the appropriate time that you raise your hand clearly in front of the screen and keep it there until we move to the next part of the vote. Please bear in mind, bear with us while we count the votes, as this will take a little longer than usual, as officers check between screens to ensure all members have been seen. Voting for the 2021-22 budget will be done by recorded vote, and officers will call out names in alphabetical order. Please clearly state for, against, or abstention when asked. I should advise you that in accordance with section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, a councillor is barred from voting on the council's budget if they have an outstanding council tax debt of over 2 months. If any member is affected by this rule, they must disclose that section 106 applies and may not vote. Failure to comply is a criminal offence. Apologies have been received from councillors Davis and Jones. And the Lord Mayor's announcements, not that many in the pandemic. I've attended the Norwich Central Mosque on the 2nd of February, where they launched a hot food provision for homeless people. I attended the Civic Association AGM on the 3rd of February and a town hall meeting with the Royal British Legion on the 16th of February. So no, that was all actually. Right, item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest to make on any items on the agenda? You will need to state which item the interest is in, whether the interest is pecuniary or not, the nature of the interest, and whether you have been granted a dispensation. Councillor Driver.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've got an interest on item 7, but the monitoring officer's granted me a dispensation for that, so I will stay and I will vote on that. And I've also got an interest on item 6 as a council tenant and I received the council tax reduction scheme, so I'll be leaving the meeting for that item.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, I have a dispensation for the interest of being council tenant.
Okay. Are you anything else? You froze there for a bit.
Sorry, shall I repeat that again? Sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Item 7. I have a dispensation as I am a council tenant, but I can still take part in the debate.
Okay, thank you. And another, Councillor Waters.
Yes, I'm seeking have a dispensation as a council tenant.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Harris.
I also have an interest in item 7, but I've been granted dispensation from the monitoring officer.
Thank you. Councillor Brockett, Colton?
You nearly got it right.
I did, Julie.
I'm a council tenant too, but I don't know that I've been given dispensation from the monitoring office, but I am a council tenant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Peake.
Yeah, item 7, I wasn't sure about this. I wasn't going to mention it, but I am a council tenant. I'm not receiving any benefits or anything. Do I need to declare that? I'm not sure.
To get a dispensation. Well, you have declared it. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Item 6, interest and be leaving the meeting for item 6, and similarly item 7, although I've been granted dispensations, they will be remaining. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Where's Councillor Button? I can't see. I will find it. Oh, wait a minute, I saw you there. I'm going backwards and forwards here. Councillor Button.
Item 7, council tax, council tenant dispensation, and item 6, in receipt of council tax reductions, so I shall be leaving the meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's it, I've got everyone covered there. Screen to screen. Can't see anyone else. Okay, thank you very much.
Could you ask Jeff to confirm that the dispensation applies to all members of council who are council tenants?
The monitoring officer, can I ask him to come in at this stage and confirm that dispensation has been granted?
Yes, Lord Mayor, the dispensation applies to all councillors who are also council tenants. So all the council tenant members may continue to participate in the debate and vote.
Thank you. Very good. Okay, questions from the public. There are no questions have been received for this meeting, and no petitions have been received for the meeting either. So we move on to item 4. I call upon Councillor Waters to move the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 26th of January 2021.
So moved, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Bergelein to second the minutes.
Formally seconded, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour, please indicate. Okay, thank you. It's carried. Item 5, corporate plan. I call upon Councillor Waters to move this item.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And there is a presentation as normal, but this time it's on Zoom. So the corporate plan sets our political priorities, and the budget which follows it puts the money and the resources behind the delivery of those priorities. I've just lost my screen, never mind. So can we go on to the next slide, please?
Okay. I'm the last person to criticise anyone for IT.
it's in 6 weeks. Yeah. What is the issue of 6 weeks? Caused by others. 2 weeks.
Okay, well, we'll just have to have a small break for about 2 minutes. So it won't be eating into your time, Councillor Waters. No panic.
Yes, the minutes are ticking away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is probably a relief to everybody.
Oh, with that?
Yeah, that looks better.
It looks, yeah. Okay.
Right.
Can we resume? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. So the priorities we have under 3 broad headings are about neighbourhoods, people living well, and an inclusive economy. And the way we deliver those things, we do it through our direct service delivery. We do it through other people enabling others to deliver these objectives, and we also do it through influencing. Next slide, please. Now, Norwich 2040 has been central to our work over the past few years. And since I presented to Council last year, the number of working groups and partners picking up particular strands of work to help us deliver on our visioning work has greatly increased. Next slide, please. Now, in my introduction and the Chief Executive's introduction, there are references to the COVID recovery plan. And this year, the delivery of our objectives have been informed by the need to respond to the COVID pandemic. And you will see that that has been a substantial piece of work by the Council, finding the means to take the financial pressure of household budgets, supporting local businesses during lockdowns, making sure that we play our role in the public health work of the public health section at the County Council, contact tracing, COVID support officers, and also making sure that we're responding to people's day-to-day needs and helping rough sleepers. Next slide, please. And the recovery element of that is thinking about how we're going to rebuild the city, support different parts of the economy and the different activities that we have in the city. And that's covering major investments in housing and regeneration. It's about working with business partners to identify the opportunities coming through as we come out of COVID, making sure that most vulnerable continue to be supported, and crucially, making sure that the council's finances are in a secure position. And of course, that's also required us as a council to ensure that we are operating in a way which ensures that we respond not just to the present circumstances, but actually have got an agile organisation fit for purpose when we come through this. Next slide, please. So there are a number of themes which we have been working on over the past few years, and my Cabinet colleagues will be picking up each of these areas around the environment, around the economy, about fairness, about community safety, about having decent homes and secure tenures as guarantees of being able to move forward as a city in the most positive way possible. Next slide, please. And what this adds up to, what our ambitions are to build and strengthen a sustainable city. And that's the combination of social, economic and environmental strands that come together to build that. Next slide, please. But what is particularly urgent and has been for a number of years has been the need for a sustainable system of local government finance, and we are still waiting for that. Next slide, please. And that, frankly, is not rocket science. So we need government to address issues that it has signally failed to do by kicking the can down the road and not facing the fundamental issues that face local government. So fairer funding, dealing with social care, freedoms to raise new funds and decide how to spend them, and providing long-term budget certainty. Next slide, please. So we had some sense that there might have been an awareness of this, an early promise on COVID. This is the Secretary of State for Local Government, Robert Jenrick. And in those urgent first months, he talked about councils spending whatever it takes, with the implied promise that we would be able to recoup the costs and also the impact on our budgets, which Councillor Kendrick will highlight and develop in his presentation at the next item. Next slide, please. Well, we did spend whatever it took, and I have to say we were frankly shortchanged. Council colleagues will know, and people in the city will know, that we had to find a mid-year budget, emergency budget, to stabilise the financial position, because those financial supports were not forthcoming. Plenty of money given to us to pump out into the wider community, and we've done that very efficiently, but actually addressing the core funding problems of the council, that was not forthcoming. But what's been interesting, if we just take the announcements that the Prime Minister made yesterday, local government has increasingly been put at the centre of responding to COVID. We've gradually moved to a point, and it was announced yesterday, that we will be taking a central role in community testing and support, contacting hard to reach groups, making sure that people are secure and safe, and that has now become our responsibility, and we'll need recognition of that in the budget next week. Next slide, please. Now, we know that the pandemic has widened inequality in the city, and actually one of the things that we will need to do when we look at our next corporate plan, as I said, this one lasts just for the coming year, is a thorough review of the challenges that we face as a city. Next slide, please. And the problem over the past year, in terms of the impact of the pandemic, is it has happened at a point where we are particularly vulnerable after 10 years of funding cuts and reductions in resources going to public authorities like local government. Next slide, please. So some colleagues may well have read this book. The impact of pandemics is extremely significant, and the flu pandemic of 100 years ago actually has cast a long shadow. The creation of the National Health Service, for example, was driven by the experience of the pandemic, that pandemic after the First World War. And so we are facing a fork, the proverbial fork in the road. And the question is, what direction will we be taking? Next slide, please. Now, there is a school of thought from a group of what were then young, Tiggerish conservative politicians talking about a deregulated Britain, taking a swipe at the British, who were apparently the worst, among the worst idlers in the world, given the hard work that people have done in the past year to protect the NHS, to protect people, to come together. That rings a very unpleasant chime. And that's a very strong strand of thinking in the current government's thinking. These are all cabinet members. Next slide, please. And there has been a particular focus on providing services to tackle COVID through the private sector. This is the Mail Online, who highlighted, among other newspapers, the fact that a lot of public money, something like £22 billion, went into the Serco test and trace and to a whole range of other contracts. And there were some very interesting connections between the provision of those contracts and members of the Conservative Party. At the same time, local government was having its funding cut. So one of the questions that I think we're facing as a country is, yes, next slide, please, is whether we're going to go for privatised state provision on the left. That is the food for a week for children for school meals, and Serco effectively ran the rather unsuccessful test and trace system at significant cost. Next slide, please. Or are we going to move towards an important role for public and democratic provision? Next slide, please. So to conclude, in terms of our corporate plan, we will be needing to think about how we move forward into a hopefully post-COVID environment, but there'll be an awful lot to do, and there'll be a debate and an argument about how we address the many weaknesses, inequalities and flaws in the current arrangements. So there are people at the moment who are experiencing the impossibility of life on universal credit. It's been recognised that COVID has spread in areas because, I quote, people have unmet financial needs. There is a need to fundamentally revamp the welfare state. That was one product of a very traumatic period in our history. This is an equally traumatic period in our history, and we really need to remodel social security, and we need to make sure that we put our citizens in centre stage, because the way we move forward most effectively is clearly going to be with our citizens well-resourced, secure, and at the centre of public purpose. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Harris to second the item.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to second this paper, and Councillor Waters has given a powerful presentation of the corporate plan. We live in the fine city of Norwich, a city where residents have risen to the challenge of dealing with the pandemic over the last year, a city where people really care, but also a city where businesses and residents are finding life increasingly more challenging. Everything that we achieve must be set against the backdrop of a Tory government which has simply slashed local government funding. We have to chase funding pots to support vital local services for some of the most vulnerable in our society. I have just 2 slides as part of my presentation, but I'll also briefly talk about other parts of my portfolio. So the first slide, from the work around the 2040 Norwich City Vision, one of the recognised challenges in the city is the provision of high quality, affordable housing. As a Labour administration, we are committed to developing a pipeline of sites for social housing. Rain Park Phase 3, Argyle Street and Mile Cross are some of the developments on the horizon. At the same time, we will continue to work and support registered providers with our vital role of building affordable housing. Next slide, please. My second slide is a call for action from this Tory government. It is recognised that there is a housing crisis across the country, and they have it within their gift to support local councils by the reform of the use of retained right to buy receipts. We responded to a consultation on this very subject back in 2018, but still there's been no movement on the subject. Apparently, the Treasury are not keen. Homes and employment are absolutely key to our recovery plan, so I'm hoping that there might be a change of heart. Slide can be taken down, thank you. We are one of only 14 gold standard homelessness services in the country and have a key focus on preventing homelessness and housing crisis. Our approach is successful, but our resources have certainly been stretched this year. Over the last 12 months, over 1,600 people have approached the Housing Options team as being homeless or threatened with homelessness, an increase of 25% on the previous year, with a corresponding increase in officer caseloads. Despite the difficult circumstances and increased pressure on our teams and services, we have been able to maintain the excellent performance of previous years, being able to prevent homelessness in 85% of cases. It should not be forgotten that we also have a private sector leasing scheme called Let NCC, which manages 303 properties. These tenancies reduce the number of households in temporary accommodation and often offer a housing solution to many people who cannot access other housing options. This council is about finding solutions, and to my knowledge in the local area is only Broadland and Peterborough who have similar schemes. Finally, drawing to a close, we are committed to providing excellent customer care for all of our citizens as we expand the services offered and the range of ways our residents can interact with us in the coming post-COVID-19 digital age. There will be a digital strategy presented to Cabinet in early summer. As has everyone, this council has had to adapt and change its way of working during this challenging year. The corporate plan and the COVID-19 recovery plan puts our citizens at the heart of everything. I urge all councillors to support the plan presented here tonight and to also take this opportunity to thank our staff for all the amazing work that they do. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'd like to invite group spokespersons now. Councillor Bergerline.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll actually talk to the corporate plan a bit, but it's a bit of a wider scope first. So when I think about Norwich City Council, I have a very clear vision of what I want this council to be like. The council in my vision is above all brave. It offers creative, new and exciting solutions. It is forward and long-term thinking. It acts based on evidence and makes it clear what this evidence is. And it is owned by residents in a way that residents can input their ideas, their worries and their solutions without complicated processes and without deadlines. It would be owned by residents in a way that they co-produce policies, budgets and plans rather than simply being consulted on an already formulated plan or decision. I want residents to feel that each one of them is a piece of the puzzle that builds this council. But I'm afraid Norwich City Council does not yet live up to my vision, and this, in my view, is reflected in the corporate plan and the performance indicators that go with it. We have had plenty of opportunities to discuss the content of the corporate plan, and you will know that despite it falling short of my ambitions for the council, I think it also has a lot of positive elements. So I would like to focus on the changes to the performance indicator, so how we measure how well. My first concern is that our assessment of the council's work to reduce crime and antisocial behaviour has been reduced to one performance indicator, the percentage of people feeling safe. I think this is an important indicator, but I'm quite frustrated to see that this is the only one. More and more concrete performance indicators are needed for this crucial area of the Council's work. Let me give you 2 examples to illustrate this. One concerning finding of the data collected by the Council in previous years is that Council tenants feel significantly less safe than non-Council tenants. This can have many reasons, but it highlights the importance to thoroughly assess the role of the Council as a landlord and how it can deter crime and antisocial behaviour happening in Council housing. I would say the overwhelming amount of casework I receive is about issues of antisocial behaviour in Council housing. This is a complex and difficult area, and circumstances, vulnerabilities and support for all tenants need to be considered. But it is clear to me that the Council needs to take a deep dive into exploring what more can be done to resolve antisocial behaviour and what the Council's role as a landlord can be. And the Council needs to monitor this carefully with specifically designed performance indicators. A second example is highlighted in a report by the UEA commissioned by the Council, which considers an area that is in the Council's remit and can make a real difference in terms of crime and antisocial behaviour. Environmental design features, so the layout of a neighbourhood or a public space, and especially how well it is cared for, can greatly reduce crime and fear of crime. So actually thoroughly assessing how well the Council cares for the land it owns will be really important. My second concern is in relation to the performance indicator around CO2 emissions. I mean, seriously, what are you doing? I wrote this down, so I don't swear. Taking out a measure for the citywide emissions and only keeping CO2 emissions from local authorities' operations. This is going 20 steps backwards. Emissions from the Council's operations only make up less than 2% of the city's emissions. Even if we achieve net zero tomorrow, and we won't, there is 98% left. And we need to be the kind of brave Council that kickstarts and accelerates tackling these 98%. And we need to keep a very close eye on how well that is going. I watched the SEEP committee the other day and heard Labour colleagues argue that the most important thing is to ensure that energy efficiency in the private housing sector is increased. And yes, let's get on with it. And let's give it a clear sign that we as a council are determined to transform Norwich in partnership with businesses, organisations and residents. Let's put citywide CO2 emissions back in our performance framework. I also followed the Scrutiny Committee, where I was shocked to hear that Labour councillors are saying that citywide emissions would be something to consider once the council was in a better position. In this situation, there is no, this does not concern me. We can look at this later, or here I have no influence. It is on all of us in all areas, all of the time, with all our might, all our vision, and with everything we have to throw at it to sort this mess and get us to net zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bergline. Councillor Lubbock.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Waters and Councillor Bergline, for your contributions. These are we as a council find ourselves in. Financial uncertainty through years of underfunding from the government, a climate change emergency through neglecting the science, the consequences of a bad Brexit deal that through too many people listening to the lies of politicians, or the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. A pandemic which has stifled our economy, killed over 120,000 people with term illnesses and some with mental health problems. And one thing that has been vulnerable communities, and as Councillor Waters describes, they're often characterised by low wages, poor quality housing, inadequate social security and insecure employment. And I'm afraid that Norwich does have quite a number of people who are vulnerable. Although earlier corporate plans have sought to address these issues, we would all agree that COVID-19 has made tackling these structural issues a pressing necessity. Hence, the Council's corporate plan is complemented by the COVID recovery blueprint agreed and used year, a key document setting out the Council's themes and activities for 21-22. The Scrutiny Committee, charged with keeping the Council accountable through tracking performance, will be very mindful of the need to focus on our vulnerable communities, and to some extent recommendations for new KPIs to be included in the pared down list from 60 to 28. They wanted to see metrics around estate management and a response time to antisocial behaviour complaints. Both of these issues featured an action plan meeting for Norwich South last week, with the reports from both councillors and the police illustrate clearly the plight of those communities blighted by antisocial behaviour, including drug taking on stairwells of council properties. Recommendation from scrutiny members under the heading of healthy organisation also included metrics reflecting staff welfare and attendance statistics, and they wanted them added to the new KPIs. I hope that Cabinet can look again at including these suggested KPIs from the Scrutiny Committee. As we all know, we feel we need to be more inclusive of the opposition parties when they come up with just scrutinising the issues. With diminished resources, we all have to work hard to ensure that they are used more effectively and focused on those in need, whether it be resources from the general fund, capital expenditure, or the housing revenue. On a more upbeat note by mentioning some of the opportunities ahead. For example, the Greater Norwich 5-year investment in Kets Heights, improvements to Marriott's Way, and football developments at Bowthorpe. The council's successful towns with 25 million providing skills, infrastructure and urban regeneration, and the 1.5 million from the government's decarbonisation scheme. So there are a few bright lights on a very worrying social, economic and environmental situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. I'd like to now invite other councillors. Councillor Stannard. You there? Councillor Stannard, you're muted.
I was on mute, I'm sorry. Nearly a year of this. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about infrastructure investment and the way we've used that to ensure good economy, good sustainable growth. So you'll see two maps here. The one on the left is 21 to 22, and the one on the right is 20 to 21. So I'll start with 20 to 21. And of course, the first thing you'll see is housing, investment in housing around the city of all types. Rain Park, our properties there, selling like hotcakes and putting the company into a healthy, profitable trading position, which is where it stands at the moment. Also work on the King's Arms site. That's a compulsory purchase order of a vacant site, demonstrating our commitment to bring those sites back into use and prevent private owners from land banking them. On non-housing, a number of areas. I'll draw your attention to the fantastic improvements to London Street, public realm improvements in association with local business, which has really improved that area of the city. And of course, the Beryl Bike Scheme, which is everywhere in the city. And then if we look at 21-22, again, there's King's Arms, Rain Park and Argyle Street ongoing in housing. On non-housing, the work that's going on at the moment in Tombland, which is not just improving facilities for pedestrians and cyclists, but is improving a really important historical area of the city. Also work coming on Kets Heights, a fantastic investment there that's really going to improve that area. And of course, there's the investment in our tennis courts, Harford, Hayham and Lakenham, opening up accessibility to tennis with huge benefits for people in particular from deprived areas, and really trying to address notions of elitism in sport. What we're really trying to do is invest in an inclusive economy for the people of the city, new homes, investment in infrastructure that facilitates healthier and more environmentally friendly choices, opportunities for healthier living, and of course economic redevelopment and the creation of jobs, all supporting that. So can I move on to my next slide, please? Now, what the government could do to support us was the exam question. Actually, I think it's more about what the government could stop doing, which is hindering us. So the first bullet point is to stop relying on a single artificial methodology to calculate housing need and the duty to cooperate. The government should promote sensible strategic planning to ensure development is coordinated with investment decisions on national and regional infrastructure, and stop pretending that local housing needs can realistically be calculated by a single methodology, which then needs to be abandoned or tweaked when it doesn't give the answers the government wanted. Secondly, stop pursuing unnecessary and counterproductive deregulation for commercial property. Investment in property requires confidence, and this confidence can be easily eroded in urban areas by a deregulated system, where individual landowners are free to change uses of their properties for short-term gain. And then finally, stop trying to breathe further life into failed schemes such as the starter homes and the right to contest. Allow local authorities to provide for the type of homes that best meet local needs, for instance, through the provision of social rented property in Norwich, rather than new homes for sale for people who can already afford other homes in the area. Also, allow local authorities and communities to benefit from easier routes to compulsory purchase of derelict sites. I'm sorry, I've got a dog trying to... Shush! Don't you like my speech? I'm sorry, Lord Mayor. I'm nearly finished. Shh. Please. Sorry. Easier routes to compulsorily purchase derelict sites in private communities, in private ownership, rather than seek to offer these powers to communities to purchase sites from councils. The problem of stored sites in Norwich is those in private hands, not in council ownership, and this government policy seems to be a response to a problem that doesn't exist. You can take my slide down now. And sorry about the dog.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stoddart. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm proud to be a member of this Labour administration, which has done so much to address the challenges of climate change and community safety, all in this year of the tragic pandemic. Despite challenges, we've achieved so much. The council was shortlisted for the Global Good Awards in 2020. We won it. Can I have the next slide, please? We were recognised as one of the top performing councils in the country by Friends of the Earth for our responses to climate change emergency. Recycling is up. Retrofitting thermodynamic and solar on our houses continues. Grant aid to help private sector residents insulate their homes continues. Environmental services are coming back in-house with all its attendant financial and energy savings. These include fitting of solar power on the depot roof, along with provision for car and van charging. We reduced our own carbon footprint by 62%. We're on track to reach carbon neutrality by 2030, and the current trend per capita carbon emission across all of Norwich currently is on track for 2034 neutrality. The formation last year of our cross-party climate and environmental emergency panel is already paying off. Panel members have contributed great advice, and I thank them for this. With support and new powers from central government, we could do a heck of a lot more, Lord Mayor. I now turn to community safety. Next slide, please. Lord Mayor, we want Norwich to be a great place to live, and I'm pleased that we continue to invest in making all our citizens feel safer and more secure. We're funding the installation of gates across joint alleyways to reduce crime and disorder from intruders to the main houses in the city. We provided additional funding for other forms of community safety, including fitting demountable CCTV when needed. We've invested in a new CCTV system to which the demountable CCTVs are linked, and we give Norfolk Police access to all our CCTV system. We've offered active access 24/7 when they're ready to take this up. We've begun an accelerated programme to secure entry systems to many of our flats. We've restructured our antisocial behaviour team, adding new posts to which we are actively recruiting. We will continue to bolster its capacity to respond. Our Amazing Pathways service continues to look after our rough sleepers, providing COVID-secure accommodation for them right through the pandemic, including with great effect. We've begun work with Norwich Police on a multi-agency working party, which will give a much more joined-up approach to antisocial behaviour associated with people with multiple complex needs. The slide can go off, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I could go on, but I'd run out of my allotted time. Put simply, this budget invests in the services we care about and allows us to prioritise, protect and expand them. So please vote to support it. Let's keep working together in a spirit of solidarity to deliver the positive change our constituents expect and need from us now more than ever. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. Councillor McCartney-Gray.
Lord Mayor, due to unforeseen circumstances, Councillor Beth Jones is unable to join us this evening and sends her profuse apologies. I have been asked to give her presentation, and knowing her passion for her cabinet responsibilities, including private renters who make up a quarter of the population of Norwich and are often forgotten by our government, I hope I can do this justice. Next slide. I have 4 points to make this evening. Point 1, we have during this pandemic offered support and advice for our private renters. We have cracked down on illegal evictions and been successful in prosecuting rogue landlords, including the recent high-profile case, which ended in the successful High Court prosecution. I'm sure you all know which case I mean. We have talked about it often enough at full council. Nobody, absolutely nobody, should underestimate the significance of this on a national scale. And I pay tribute to Beth and the officers involved for their incredible tenacity and determination to achieve justice. This budget invests, excuse me, point 2, this budget invests into and develops our service to protect private renters even more strongly. By investing in our fantastic team of officers, we are ensuring that our residents in the private sector receive the support they need. We also, over the summer, were able to write to all private landlords to remind them of their responsibilities and duties to their tenants. Point 3, how are we keeping the pressure on the government? Well, as a council, we are passing motions and we are campaigning for the end of Section 21 and the right to secure tenancies and genuinely affordable rents for tenants. We are taking high-profile cases to the High Court and winning, but there is also so much more we can do, and it is hoped our opposition members will support plans going forward. Point 4. We will continue to invest in our community enablers and neighbourhood development teams to better understand the profound effects this pandemic will have on our communities going forward. To make you all aware, these teams have worked tirelessly on offering the most amazing support to local organisations and community groups throughout the pandemic at a time when the government response has been disjointed and often lacking. This is just a brief overview of the corporate plan in the time allowed, but I do hope everybody can back this evening and support the budget which underpins it. With your support, we can do even more for our citizens. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McCartney-Gray. Councillor Packer.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Next slide, please. Lord Mayor, despite the significant impact of COVID-19, we are resolutely committed to prioritise improving the health and well-being of this city and its residents. This builds on a story that has been told in Norwich since Labour came to power in the early part of the last century and saw us rapidly construct the beautiful parks, and allotments which have made Norwich a truly fine city. All of this is discretionary at a time when other councils have shut parks, sold land and run down community services. We continue to protect and invest. We're managing thousands of trees in a green space bigger than 198 football pitches. In the last year, we've been awarded 2 green flags. We continue to provide facilities over a vast area for our residents, both young and old, to improve their personal well-being. However, we are not complacent and realise that we can always do more and should strive to do so. What you have seen and will continue to see is a city council which is committed to improving biodiversity across the city through continuing to protect and maintain trees and green spaces, as well as managing our green spaces to encourage and support wildlife. As you can see from this slide, we continue to invest in and improve our parks and open spaces as places for residents, with hundreds of thousands of pounds of capital investment funding committed. And thirdly, we continue our focused work with and empowerment of the community. Our residents have and want to have a key role to play in the health of Norwich. Partnership working is crucial to this success. Next slide, please. Lord Mayor, it has become quite clear to me and many others over the past year that central government needs to up its game and make dramatic improvements. In particular, there must be a commitment of ring-fenced funding to councils to ensure that they can continue to invest and protect their parks and open spaces. Never before have these places been so needed and appreciated by our residents. Adequate funding must be provided. This government must provide far better, clearer information, both to councils and residents, about when our services must be closed and opened up. And thirdly, this government must dramatically improve both the process and funding available for our residents and businesses to survive. This government has not made it clear or straightforward for our market traders, for instance, as well as other businesses, to apply for desperately needed funding. Many residents are also falling through the gaps of an ill thought out grant system. Lord Mayor, COVID-19 has shone a spotlight on our parks and open spaces and reaffirmed that we were always right to protect, promote and invest in them for the benefit of all of our residents. This council will continue to invest and improve the services our residents rightly expect and cherish. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beckett. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. As Councillor Davis can't be here this evening, I'll be speaking to this part of the report on her behalf. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I have 3 points to make here. Firstly, the council tax reduction scheme is a discretionary measure by this council. It's a choice we make to support our residents. We are the only council in East Anglia retaining this scheme to protect our poorest and most vulnerable residents. It is a measure of which this council can be proud. Secondly, the financial inclusion strategy commissioned by this council is a vital measure, especially in these testing current circumstances. This support for our residents' rights is an important commitment for us to maintain. Thirdly, our investment to tackle fuel poverty is addressing an issue more urgent than ever before, as the consequences of the pandemic place pressure on household finances. And then what the government can do, if I could have the next slide, please. The benefits cap is a driver of child poverty. This pernicious cap has been criticised by this council before, and again we call for it to be scrapped. Secondly, free school meals. This has been a consistent message from this council. Marcus Rashford's illuminated the issue last year, and the government intransigence over this shows just how out of step this Tory government is. Thirdly, the call to retain the £20 universal credit uplift is a measure the government could and should deliver. It would stop so many people from falling into poverty, including residents in Norwich. Lord Mayor, this corporate plan presses for financial inclusion and is determinedly anti-poverty in its aims. I would ask all here tonight to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. I'd like to call Councillor Carlow.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It was very interesting, if indeed not instructive, that our council leader, Councillor Waters, didn't once mention climate change in his presentation on the corporate plan, even though we are facing climate change and biodiversity emergencies. He talked about the 1945 moment, but not a single mention of climate change. Yet this is a crucial year when all countries must move rapidly towards net zero. The Climate Change Committee says that the 2020s must be the decade of decisive action, that we must be seeking a 78% reduction in carbon emissions from 1990 levels. It's a year when all eyes will be on the UK, when the UK is hosting the COP26 climate conference. The Climate Change Committee calculates that around 1/3 of the UK's emissions are dependent on sectors directly shaped or influenced by local authorities. The corporate plan proposes reporting on carbon dioxide emissions from the council's own operations, which amount to just 1.2% of the city's CO2 emissions. The plan will also report on the number of insulation measures and percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting. But the plan doesn't go far enough. For example, Norwich City Council has responsibility for nearly 15,000 council homes, and they need to be made zero carbon. The council will need to report rapid progress on retrofitting its properties and changing heating systems from gas to non-fossil fuel power. The corporate plan has got funding now for insulating 50 homes and installing 30 new domestic solar panels, but that's really a flea bite. The Climate Change Committee report on the 6th carbon budget and local authorities published in December recommends incorporating climate indicators in the corporate performance framework as a way of making action on climate change visible and accountable within the everyday business of the local authority. This allows performance to be tracked consistently and transparency. I hope, therefore, that the council will strongly beef up its performance on climate change and on climate change performance indicators and monitoring of these. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlow. Any other councillors wish to contribute? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I had to do a bit of waving there. Yes, I'd also like to pick up the point about the climate emergency. And Councillor Maguire, I was really surprised actually to hear Councillor Maguire saying that we're on track to be net zero by 2034 per capita. I mean, that's just nonsense, to be honest. I mean, even if you leave aside the fact that that doesn't include shipping, aviation and production and consumption emissions, so all the international travel that people do from Norwich and all this, everything that we buy that's produced in other countries, it's also, if you look at that trajectory, that a large part of that, the reductions in recent years has been due to decarbonisation of electricity as we moved away from coal, and that's a big easy win, and we're not going to be having such easy wins in the future, so we can't continue on that trajectory. But then if you look at the Friends of the Earth report that Councillor Maguire cited, that says that we have to be reducing carbon emissions by 13% year on year, which includes retrofitting or insulating more than 3,300 homes every year, At the moment, we're looking at 50, a few dozen. It means installing more than 2,200 heat pumps every year. We're installing a handful, maybe, I'm not exactly sure on the details, but a dozen, maybe a few more. You know, it's completely unrealistic to say that we're on track to be carbon neutral by 2034. I just don't understand how the council can be so complacent about this. And, you know, we will come on later in the budget speeches to some of the Green suggestions for raising additional finance and ways that we can increase our action on the climate emergency. Because clearly we need more government funding. You know, that's a given, and the government needs to step up. But also this council needs to step up. We need to be a local leader. We need to have a plan for how are we going to achieve that 13% year-on-year reduction. We don't have that plan currently. I'd also like to just pick up on a couple of the points on antisocial behaviour that Councillor Maguire mentioned. You know, I speak to residents regularly, as Councillor Bogerline also does, and she mentioned that the vast majority of the casework we get is about antisocial behaviour in council properties. You know, it's for various reasons. But I think that, you know, this is something where the council has a clear mandate and there's a clear evidence that the council needs to step up its game on that. And you know, simply to say, oh, we've installed one CCTV, you know how hard I had to fight to get that CCTV installed in Barnard's Yard. You know, simply to say that we're doing great. You know, we need a bit of humility here, and you need to actually, you know, I find it's frankly arrogant to assume that we're doing great on this. You know, we need to acknowledge that there's more work to be done.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Any other councillors wish to contribute? I haven't got any hands there waving. No. Oh, Councillor Stutely and Councillor Giles. Councillor Stutely.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to pick up actually on the points made about antisocial behaviour. We work really closely with the police in Town Close, and we know that unfortunately antisocial behaviour doesn't just exist in social housing. Far from it. It's across the whole of the city. We must reiterate that antisocial behaviour has become the problem it is, mainly due to Tory government austerity, endless Tory county council service cuts, and the removal of all of Norfolk's police community support officers. This administration does do a great deal to mitigate the effects of all of these issues, and I'm proud to be a part of that work. So I support this corporate plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm also proud to support this corporate plan. Just wanted to come back on the points that Councillors Carlo and Osborne were making regarding retrofitting in the private sector. I absolutely 100% support their ambition, and it would be fantastic if our houses in the private sector could match the energy efficiency rates of our own council housing stock. However, as we saw at the SEEP panel meeting last week, the estimated cost of retrofitting all houses in the private sector to get them up to a grade C energy efficiency rating was £511 million, I believe. Our general fund revenue budget for the whole year is 57 million. So while I absolutely share your ambition, I think it's important to note that there's a huge disparity between the rhetoric used by the Conservative government ministers and the actual funding they provide available to local authorities. I think our officers have worked exceptionally hard to secure the funding they have for the work they are doing. And we need to, and as I go back to the point I've made many times before, that local authorities don't exist in a vacuum. We do need the government to match the ambitions set out in their rhetoric with concrete funding to enable us to do what we'd like to do to match the ambitions we have. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Any other councillors wish to contribute? No? Okay. Councillor Waters, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'll just take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all the officers for their work in putting together the corporate plan. I'd like to thank my cabinet colleagues and other people who have spoken about the different strands of the corporate plan in more detail. The decision to reduce the number of KPIs from 60 to 28 was made for a very specific reason, that we should be assessed as a council on the things that we are specifically responsible for. And that is the reason for that change. That doesn't mean to say that information or data about some of the other things that we are engaged with as an influencer or as a partner have disappeared. That information is available, but it does reflect the way things have been moving over the past few years, particularly in a time of acute pressure on the city. And I was surprised by Councillor Bergelin's kind of, I don't know, unawareness of the work that the 2040 partnership is doing. And if we take issues like carbon emissions, well, we have targets for ourselves as a city council in suppressing those emissions, and we've made significant progress in that, as Councillor Maguire has made that point on a number of occasions, including this evening. But the challenge is a buy-in from the city. It's activities across the whole of the city and beyond. And so the work that's being done by the carbon reduction businesses, the group that's been working with Chris Sargerson, the work that's being done on how do we make the city centre a more pleasant place. Car free was one of the things that this council asked the 2040 visioning group to look at, and that work is underway. So we now work across a much wider landscape, and we need to, because we are faced with significant challenges. And so climate change is central to that, as is a better economy for people, a sustainable economy. So the work that we're doing through the Good Economy Commission. So there's a whole series of strands of work that we are undertaking with a wide range of partners. I've talked about a rich partnership that we are now part of in delivering some of these broader objectives. And the point has been well made about the fact that we need a different sort of government. A government that is going to invest in some of these really pressing issues around the environment, around poverty, around inequality. And that's why I talked about that fork in the road. And we have put ourselves with this corporate plan very much on the side of the public investment, the democratic interest, the interest of our citizens, the need to rebuild the rights of our citizens to be able to change some of the great challenges that they face in their own lives, we all face in our own lives, but also how we mobilise to build a better society. So I hope that the ambition of this corporate plan has come through, and I hope that all colleagues on the council can vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Okay. We got that. Abstentions? Okay, thank you. And all those in favour? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Okay, we'll move to item 6, the council tax reduction scheme for 2021-2022. Those members who have declared an interest in this item will need to leave the meeting now, so if you can just wait online, we'll invite you back after the final vote is taken. Okay, we're there. Okay, right. Thank you. I call upon Councillor Huntley to move the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In 2020, Citizens' Advice identified that fixed costs, such as council tax, pushed 11% of the people they supported with debt into a negative budget. They called on policymakers to identify opportunities to increase people's income and reduce essential living costs. This council, through the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, seizes that opportunity. Council tax regulations state councils must make reductions for certain classes of pensioners. No other groups are required to receive reductions under these regulations. This Labour administration is emphatically proud to stand up for the poorer residents of this city and provide a council tax reduction scheme, ensuring reductions up to the level of 100%. This scheme maintains the provision made by this council for the last 8 years, increasing the level of income brackets, retaining the local discount provision for care leavers, retaining the local discount provision for those fleeing domestic violence, retaining a single-person discount for those giving a home to asylum seekers and refugees. Protecting the least well-off within Norwich and ensuring that residents are spared the pressures of debt is a flagship policy of this Labour administration. Financial inequality in the UK is now greater than it was in the 1960s and 1970s. The Resolution Foundation stated in a recent study that a quarter of all household wealth in the UK is held by just 1% of the population. The answer to this inequality is a commitment to the redistribution of wealth. Fairness can be achieved by making a fundamental and irreversible shift in the balance of power and wealth in favour of working people and their families. The taxation system is the mechanism through which to achieve this. But the Tory agenda is never about fairness, nor even about ensuring that the wealthiest people pay their fair share towards the institutions, services and resources we all use. It falls to local government to lead the way in establishing, as a principle of fairness, that the burden of taxation does not fall disproportionately on the poorest in society. This council tax reduction scheme has been supported by most of the authorities consulted about the proposals, although disappointingly, the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner opposes it. The real benefits it affords residents and the positive message it sends out regarding fairness makes its approval a vital undertaking. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah. We're there. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm proud to second this proposal. I'm sure if Councillor Davis would have liked to have been here, given her passion and tenacity on this issue, but I hope Councillor Huntley and myself can do her credit. The past 12 months has been very difficult for many people, many residents in Norwich. However, even prior to going into the pandemic, the economy and society we had was built upon foundations which were fundamentally rotten after a decade of Conservative government austerity. As of last March, 4.2 million children across the UK were living in poverty. Food banks have gone from being virtually unheard of a decade ago to an unofficial mainstream part of the social security system. Over the last 12 months, things have undoubtedly got worse for many more residents. Over the past 12 months, a third of UK households have lost income due to COVID. 7.3 million adults are now finding themselves behind on bills. With the prevalence of home working, which brings benefits of flexibility for some, for others causes financial hardship through the need for more hours to heat your home and more meals to cook at home. It is thanks to the careful stewardship of our council finances that Norwich remains one of the few remaining councils to retain a 100% council tax reduction scheme. This is something we should be very proud of. It's a fundamental aspect of fairness that our most vulnerable residents shouldn't suffer due to the policies of this government. This 100% council tax reduction scheme gives more money in the pockets of our most vulnerable residents and prevents them having to choose between heating and eating. However, this decision is not only a matter of fairness, it's also economically literate. Our most vulnerable residents are unlikely to use the money that they save on paying in council tax to save in bank accounts. They're likely to go out and spend it on the essential items they need to lead a decent standard of living. That consumer spending supports sustaining jobs in local businesses. It also supports the local businesses whose rates we rely on in the long term for our council revenue and thus our spending on public services. I would like to finish by thanking the Revenues and Benefits staff for the fantastic work they've done in supporting residents in the last 12 months. They've, like so many of our council departments, they've seen an astronomical increase in their workload, having to combine their normal workload alongside the distribution of self-isolation payments and business support grants. Unlike perhaps doctors and nurses, local authority revenues officers aren't necessarily the most obvious heroes of the pandemic, but I think they are the hidden heroes of the pandemic in our local authority, and I would like to take this opportunity to pay them credit. This government doesn't care about the burning injustices and inequalities we face in this country. This Labour authority will never leave any residents behind in our aim of a fairer society and a stronger economy. I'm proud to second this proposal. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. I'd like to invite group spokespersons now. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have the agreeable job of commending City Council for sticking with this measure to reduce poverty. It's not the council's fault that government renamed, reduced and made more complicated the benefit that was supposed to compensate for the clearly unfair and badly thought out council tax. Our residents suffer all kinds of indignity imposed by decades of failed government policy and council tax reduction is just one part of the jigsaw that we can to some extent control. We've heard how council tax replaced the much hated poll tax, which charged the same for the millionaire and the minimum wage earner, in times when the minimum wage was still just a pipe dream. It was so much worse that council tax itself was enough of an improvement to stop people rioting in their despair and outrage. Local tax is not set in stone and is overdue for a rethink and a new vision. Land value tax, which could redistribute and level up incomes, should appeal to both major parties, while a universal income to stop people falling through the many holes in the social safety net. I think a lot more people here want to make sure that everyone can put bread on the table and support more imaginative and plausible ways to do it. One of my concerns is for people in the gig economy or those whose incomes fluctuate for other reasons. If your income hovers around the eligibility line, then a tiny increase in earnings can prove very expensive. A taper would be helpful for people just above the cutoff point. But at such times, if that happens to you, then you're also in need, but will have to rely on the hardship scheme without having a clear-cut entitlement. There are strong arguments both ways, but making an unfair tax a little less unfair was never going to be straightforward. I'm somewhat outraged to hear about the Police and Crime Commissioner expressing disappointment at our efforts to remove this one hit to people in the lowest incomes. And perhaps that's one we should ask him to try and justify at the Police and Crime Commission hustings. Another indignity that goes with low income is the inaccessible and hard to understand letters from the council that tell you about your rent, your council tax, your housing benefit, and your council tax reduction scheme, all separately. I bet I'm not the only one who's had to explain to a distraught resident how one letter cancels the other one out and that not all the letters are bills and so on. In my previous term as a councillor, I raised this as a matter for scrutiny, and I understand that 3 years later it's still under review. It was March 2018 when the Scrutiny Committee asked Cabinet to explore developing easy read letters and to appoint a member of the communications team to lead on improving correspondence. I appreciate the easy read pages where they now exist on the website, as well as the longer time intervals for reporting changes of circumstances, and I hope that further improvements will soon help to make life just a little bit less tough for the people who need those improvements. In the meantime, millions of people have fallen through the cracks of the government support packages. The pandemic has left countless families facing poverty and extreme hardship. Universal credit has been linked to high mortality rates and is ill-equipped to support people through the financial insecurity arising from the recession that we're about to enter if we don't bail out the people with the much needed Green New Deal to end food poverty, fuel poverty and environmental catastrophe. If it were in the council's gift to deliver people's quantitative easing and UBI to stop anyone falling through the cracks, then I think everyone in this chamber would bust a gut to deliver it. But you have to start with what you can do from where you are, and we can do this, and I'm glad we're doing it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. Councillor Ackroyd.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to be really brief, but that in no way should detract from how important I think this scheme is and how pleased I am that I'm actually part of the group that discusses it and agrees, to bring it to council tonight. It's we know that council tax is regressive. We know it disproportionately hits lower income households, and we know that that's even more so this year in this current financial crisis. So we're very happy to endorse all aspects of the council tax reduction scheme. One thing I do want to say, it's good to note that the scheme this year takes into account the hoped for and much needed continuing increase in universal credit and related areas so that customers will not be disadvantaged if the government decides to do the right thing in its March the 3rd budget and continue with that increase. And I so hope they do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ackroyd. Right. Any other councillors wish to indicate to speak on the item? Mike Sands, Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. One of the things I find most astounding about this is the opposition from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. A 100% tax reduction scheme must ultimately lead to lower crime rates, especially crime born out of desperation due to minimum or no income. Opposition by the Police and Crime Commissioner is completely lacking in foresight or logic. One presumes that as he rides off into the sunset with his bonanza of a severance pay back to the Ponderosa, we'll perhaps get a Police and Crime Commissioner who will take a sensible and realistic approach to this.
Thank you, Councillor Mike Sands. Any other councillors? Councillor Stuteley.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. The council tax reduction scheme is a lifeline for many families across the city and my ward, Town Close, where families otherwise might require the support of food banks, where this year, in the last year, we've seen people who have never suffered hardship before. In these circumstances and the financial constraints that have been outlined by colleagues earlier, it's truly remarkable that we remain one of the few councils in the country to maintain 100% council tax support for the most vulnerable in the city. Therefore, I congratulate my Town Close colleague, Councillor Davis, for leading on this vital policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors? No? Okay. Councillor Huntley, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you to the Council Tax Reduction Scheme panel for their work here and the officers for the continued efforts regarding this. I'd also like to say thank you to the members who've spoken this evening for their comments and endorsements. Lord Mayor, I commend this to the Council and I ask all members to support it.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to the vote. All those against? Okay. Abstentions? Okay. And all those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous, it's carried. And there's a clamour for a break, although we normally break about 8:30. And a proposer and seconder, for whatever reason, we don't need too many details. Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister asked for a break, and Councillor Stuteley, I understand that you're seconding that. Okay, how long a break should we take here then?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? 5 minutes okay for you? Sorry? Yeah, 5 minutes, so we'll have a vote on that? Yeah, 5 minutes is enough for all of you. Okay, good stuff. Yeah, can I ask you all to turn your cameras off and go mute? Thank you. Okay, we all back. Mm-hmm. Yes, over there. That's what we were waiting for. Yes. Okay. Yeah, a few people haven't switched their videos on yet. Yeah, just Councillor Sue Sands, Councillor Ben Price. They're not back yet, or Councillor Sands. Just waiting for Councillor Price. Okay, right, we'll plough on. Okay, item 7. The item you've all been waiting for, the Council's 2021-22 budget and the medium-term financial strategy. There's a few issues to do with this. There are a number of recommendations listed for this item. After debating the report, we will vote on these in several parts. So we have received a request to take recommendations A1 to A6 and A7 to A26 separately. These will be recorded votes. The first vote will be recommendations A1 to A6. The second vote will be recommendations A7 to A26. The third vote will be on recommendation B. 2 amendments to the budget have been received. The first is from Councillor Wright and the second from Councillor Osborne. Copies have been made available on the Council website and circulated to members. The mover of the report has indicated that he will not accept the amendments, so they will be dealt with consecutively in the usual way after the main motion has been moved and seconded. So I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 7.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm honoured to give this council a presentation of this year's proposed budget for Norwich City Council. For in tough times, we have stood up to protect our services and the people of Norwich in this budget. If we can move to the next slide, please. I will give members a few seconds just to study that slide. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you very much. Firstly, I must explain how difficult the overall position has been made for this council by cuts imposed upon us by the government in revenue support funding for this council. Indeed, we have been one of the worst hit councils in the country, as the chart before shows us how severe those cuts have been to Norwich. The papers present the proposed revenue budget for 21-22 for the general fund and housing revenue accounts, alongside the proposed capital programme and treasury management strategy. The Pressure on the resources available to run vital day-to-day services remains extremely challenging as a result of increased demand and the ongoing impact of the COVID pandemic. If we can move to the next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you very much. I'll give members just a few seconds just to see that. The budget proposals include a 1.99% increase to the council tax, along with permanent savings, additional income and one-off grant funding confirmed as part of the provisional finance settlement. In addition, short-term COVID-19 related growth items have been identified, with the council's car parking and rental income levels being affected most by the pandemic. To address these, there have been a number of short-term savings options which have been proposed, such as changing the approach to the funding of the capital programme and reducing external borrowing costs. Despite the need to deliver savings, the council has worked hard to protect frontline services again this year, and we have avoided the need for service cuts. Furthermore, the budget for 21-22 has been balanced without the need to draw down on reserves. However, it is clear that pressure on the council's finances will continue over the coming years. A further estimated 11.8 million will be needed to be saved by 25-26 due to the amount of funding provided to local councils being entirely inadequate to keep the demand for local services. The challenge will require cost-cutting service reviews to drive forward the savings options for future years. Yet, despite the extremely challenging financial position, the General Fund Capital Programme includes a proposed 24.4 million of investment over the next 5 years. This includes investments in vital city and skills infrastructure, funded through the council's successful bid for 25 million of the town steel funding. There was, as I announced at the cabinet meeting, a further 1.456 million to be included in projects to be delivered as part of the government's decarbonisation scheme and green homes scheme. The housing revenue budget includes a proposed rent increase of 1.5% to enable this council to continue to invest in existing and new homes. This investment is reflected in the capital programme, proposed 5-year programme totalling 207 million is being proposed. And this will deliver significant investment in existing housing stock as well as 300 new homes. I know that Councillor Harris, in seconding this motion, will expand upon this. Can I thank the officers for their hard work in producing this budget? And I am very glad to report that Norwich City Council will remain one of the very few councils in England that will continue to offer the 100% council tax reduction scheme, which is so important to the poorest members of our society. Coming at the time when the entire local government sector is under extreme pressure, when, as I said at the last council meeting, the costs of COVID have not been fully funded by this government, and that many councils are having to make further cuts in the services that they provide. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you very much. I'll give members a few seconds just to take that in. Our budget projections show that we will need to continue to make savings over the years ahead. And the challenge gets harder each year. Therefore, we must remain concerned about the future, as the medium-term financial forecast shows that the levels of savings that we are going to have to make in future years are going to be hard. For those who propose that we should take money from the reserve to spend now, I will remind them you can only spend reserves once, then they are gone. So if we spend them now, that will lead to equal service cuts and services in the future. And those who propose to do so, that is, take money from the reserves, should be honest to admit the damage that they will cause in the future. Could we have the next slide, please? Furthermore, we are faced by considerable uncertainty, pressure on business rates and council tax receipts, long-term impacts on council income streams, short-term revenue implications of the town's funds projects. There is also the so-called fairer funding review, which, as I've said in the past, is actually about unfair funding, given that they hope to take money away from Labour urban authorities and give them to Tory Shire districts. Then there's the business rates review and the new homes bonus. There are capital requirements needed for our asset portfolio and, of course, investments in information technology, which is so important for this council if we want to keep up with the latest developments. There are also future policy changes which we may, as a council, face with, will present financial challenges, such as the National Waste Strategy and the Planning White Paper. We should, as a council, demand from central government a proper level of funding for the entire local government sector, so that we do not face another decade of austerity or cuts in local services, just as we have faced over the last decade. Secondly, we need from central government for them to announce a 3-year financial settlement for local government, so that we can all properly plan for the medium term. Thirdly, we need a review of the council tax. The owner of a multi-million-pound mansion pays only 3 times the level of council tax as a tenant of the humblest bedsit. There must be added bands at the top end to better reflect the ability to pay from those better off. In this year's budget, the City Council was once again be able to present a balanced budget. A budget which, although extremely challenging, avoids cuts to frontline services at a time when our residents need them most. And despite the ongoing pressure on the council's budget as a result of the local government funding system, which is not fit for purpose. It stands as a remarkable achievement that this Labour administration is yet again able to present a budget such as this, which protects our services. A Labour council is like a battered shield, protecting as much as we can do ordinary people from the effects of austerity. It has been because of this sound administration by this Labour group that we can continue to do so. Now, as I have said, Councillor Harris, as a seconder of this revenue account. But can I just finally say, this is not a budget of cutbacks. It is a budget of investments. Investments in our assets, investments in our services, and investment in the people of Norwich. Therefore, Lord Mayor, I would urge this council to support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Harris, can I ask you to second the item?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm happy to second all of the recommendations of this budget paper, and thanks to both Councillor Kendrick for his presentation and to the officers who have worked with us to achieve this balanced but still ambitious budget. The housing revenue account is a ring-fenced account with the vast majority of the income coming from the rent that our tenants pay. Our housing stock is an increasingly scarce but very precious resource, with the right to buy still impacting on our stock numbers year on year. 795 homes having been lost from social rent over the last 5 years. As a council, we have invested significant sums of money in maintaining and improving our stock, and will continue to do so, £129 million in the last 6 financial years. These planned works often result in environmental benefits, lowering of fuel bills, and a reduction in the number of reactive repairs. Amongst other things, we have also strengthened our independent living team, are investing in a new IT system to help residents and staff alike, and will of course respond to any government reforms of building and fire safety that relate to our stock. Although the HRA is in a strong position, there are challenges, and some of those I touched upon when speaking to the corporate plan. As you will all be aware, the HRA lost a significant amount of money due to the 1% rent decrease imposed over a period of 4 years by the Tory government. This resulted in a loss of over £200 million of rental income over a 30-year period, money which we will never recoup. This year, we are proposing a 1.5 rent increase. This was considered very carefully as we acknowledge that in the current financial climate, additional expenditure for tenants is always of concern. However, that means that the average rent will still be lower than the average rent would have been in 2016-17 without the enforced rent reduction. The increase in rent has to be balanced against the need for continued investment in our neighbourhoods, the continued maintenance and improvement to our stock and the building of new homes, such as the pressing need for new homes that we now have a housing commissioning board, and we are in the process of establishing our own small team to take forward housing development on behalf of the HRA. We cannot afford to stand still, and we want to utilise the knowledge that we gain with each development. We have built award-winning homes, and we will continue to build new homes and create communities that our residents need and deserve. So that leads me on to the first slide. So in this year alone, we're proposing a capital programme of 48.839 million, the breakdown illustrated in front of you. The next slide illustrates the enormity and the ambition of the proposed HRA capital programme over the next 5 years, over 206 million. Just take a moment to think about that amount. So the key outcomes are listed below that figure. So I'm sure you've all read them in the papers. And then the last slide shows how we propose to fund the HRA capital programme. The HRA is forecast to make a surplus of income over expenditure of 5.039 million in 21-22, and it is proposed to use this surplus along with 10.64 million of existing reserves to fund capital investment in 21-22. Lord Mayor, let's not forget for one moment, but behind these tables, facts and figures, we are talking about investing in people's lives. We are living through a pandemic and social housing is needed more than ever. I urge you all to vote for this budget tonight, which lets us keep on delivering for our city and changing lives for the better. Something that I hope that we're all prepared to support. I'm proud to second this budget in front of you. Thank you.
Councillor Harris. Okay, we'll move to the amendments. I call upon Councillor Wright to move the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As local councillors, we are being presented with some difficult decisions at the moment, due in part to much uncertainty around the funding of local government in the context of the pandemic. And in presenting this amendment, we get that the council needs to increase its revenue, and nobody can dispute the need to increase council income in these bleak times for local government finance. But buried in what is otherwise a budget we would support, with real reservations about the proposed £50,000 income line, which covers paying for parking at 2 of our city parks. And this amendment seeks to set aside that idea for 1 year whilst detailed planning is undertaken. This sum of money represents just over 0.25% of the council's 17.013 million net revenue budget in the paper and would be funded from reserves. At the recent scrutiny meeting, I was told that no detailed plans exist for how this scheme will operate, and no consideration had yet been given to the impact on local residents who may find parking displaced to their roads. The knock-on effect for local residents should not be understated, with motorists potentially parking in local roads rather than pay the charge. In the context of Eaton Park, thousands of pounds are being spent on a scheme to improve the route of the 25 bus on South Park Avenue. If parking is displaced here, where there are no waiting restrictions, then this objective will be lost and money wasted. At a time when city and county finances are stretched, there should be more joined-up thinking before changing what is in place. And what might the knock-on be to those services that people use in the parks if the parking charge acts as a barrier? This is a time when people have very much valued their parks for recreation and relaxation. A 1-year hiatus will enable detailed plans to be brought forward so that proper future consideration can be given. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Lubbock.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the motion and reserve right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other councillors want to indicate. Councillor Packer.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm afraid I can't vote in favour of this amendment. We've just had a large consultation with overwhelming support for the council to generate income from our services. As part of the process to develop car parking charges in our parks, there will be a feasibility study carried out. This will involve consultation with stakeholders as well as an impact quality assessment. Given the financial situation the City Council is facing, with Councillor Kendrick earlier highlighting our 97% reduction in revenue support grants, I do not feel it would be a responsible use of our reserves to commit £50,000 to enable more consultation on this matter, when we have undertaken consultation already and will carry out more consultation as part of the feasibility study. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
nothing to add at this stage. I will speak on the next amendment proposed, however. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bergerline.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think it is known to everyone that as Greens, we know that the time of private cars as our main means of transport has to be over. We know that even with a transition to electric cars, we will not achieve net zero unless we reduce dependence on private cars. So we obviously want to see a reduction of car dependency as quickly and effectively as possible. Parking charges can play a role in this, but as concerns about displacing cars on surrounding streets show, it needs to be part of a joined up strategy. What needs to be looked at is how people can find easy and cheap alternatives like public transport and better cycle infrastructure. I live just off Durham Road and my kids love going to Eaton Park. Some parts of the cycle there are nice. We go through the cemetery. Other parts almost give me a heart attack cycling with a 5-year-old. We need to go along Durham Road and then again along Earlham Road. And to be honest, the Avenue cycle path isn't much better. If we want families to venture out on bikes instead, we really have to do better than this. A similar argument has to be made for public transport. Better and cheaper public transport options are needed. And the final element needs to be that everyone has got fantastic parks and green spaces within walking distance. If these three elements were addressed thoroughly, we would be much closer to having a society that depends much less on cars. But here we are. In many ways, I'm in favour of parking charges as they are a way to highlight a direct financial impact of car travel. Cars are expensive. Think about the cost of a car, the insurance and petrol, but this expense is mostly detached from the actual car journey, which makes the car seem more attractive and cost effective than it actually is. And car parking charges can address this illusion to some extent. However, I do share some of the concerns in relation to access to parks, especially in these uncertain times. Because we have been so restricted in what we can do this year, a lot of people, especially families, have relied on our beautiful parks almost on a daily basis. And we are currently similarly discouraged from taking public transport. We just don't know what the coming year will bring and whether public transport may not be an option. I'm also worried that Norwich City Council will rely on yet another source of income from private car use. If the council makes money from it, it may be less of an incentive to actually minimise car use. For these reasons, some in the Green Group will abstain on this amendment, while some may vote against it to reflect that car parking charges can play a role in reducing private car use. If the council goes ahead with charging for parking, the income absolutely must be ring-fenced to address at least one of the three elements: better public transport, better cycling networks, and access to high-quality parks and green spaces across the city. If it is not ring-fenced, we will continue having the wrong discussions because we do not address the reasons for the use of private cars. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bergerline. Councillor Ryan.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, just unmuted there. Can I just say I can't accept this amendment as put to the meeting this evening, mainly because we don't want people to drive to our parks. We want people locally to use our parks. We want local people to use local parks. And the last thing we want is more cars clogging up the roads, causing more pollution. So looking generally at this budget, I would say this is a very prudent budget during a pandemic, which is no mean achievement for the City Council. And I overall support these proposals. I think there should be praise for the team that put this together, praise for Councillor Kendrick for coming in on budget, on time, at a time like this, and this should not go unmentioned. These savings have to be made. We know this. We don't want to make them, but they have to be made. But in making these savings, we are protecting jobs, which is a core thing we have to do. We are still helping to house people, which is another core thing we have to do. And to some extent during the pandemic, we are helping to feed people. We'll continue to do this if we vote for this particular budget. It's been a very tough 12 months for all of us, including the City Council. We know this. These are very strange times, very different times. It's a pandemic, the like we haven't seen for centuries. That's why I'm proud to support this budget. That's why I know it will protect frontline services, and that's why I can't accept this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Stannard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I think this amendment, I guess when I first saw it, I thought actually it's kind of jumping the gun because, first of all, there has been consultation, and secondly, there will be an impact assessment, and we are looking at the feasibility. And we also know, and I say this as a cabinet member for highways and transport, that if there is some form of displacement parking, there are things we can look at, can consider to try and mitigate that. And that is something which certainly I would support us doing, and have said that very openly. In terms of reliance on the private car, I think that is part of our thinking. We need to discourage reliance on the private car, and we need to encourage more public transport, cycling and walking. And I understand that certainly at the moment, public transport for the time being is something which is, because of the pandemic, is something which people are not being encouraged to overuse. But of course, that's just at the moment, just for the time being. But in terms of cycling and walking, we have many, many public parks. Councillor Packer, I think earlier on, said how many football pitches, if you multiply them up, it would be, and it was an impressive amount. Everybody has some sort of local park near to them, which they can walk or they could cycle to. And it's not necessary, in my opinion, for people to rely on the private car in order to get to parks. I think we also need to remember that a park as beautiful as Eton, which is on the outskirts of the city, does attract a lot of use from outside the city boundary, from people who don't live in the city and don't pay council tax in the city. And many of those, in fact, the only way they could access it would be by the private car. And we need to be ensuring, therefore, that if there's a cost to us, that we're able to recoup that through parking charges. But overall, we're providing these facilities for city citizens, and city citizens, by and large, should be able to access the parks without needing to rely on the private car. So I think this fits in with our wider strategy around transport, carbon reduction and the environment, as well as helping to balance the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So I'm encouraged to hear from Councillor Bergline that some members of her group will be voting against this amendment. I'd like to appeal to anybody who is currently undecided that actually the Green Group often does provide strong opposition to the Labour Group, and it is sometimes needed and wanted. It's also something where, unfortunately, if members of the Green Group are going to vote either in favour of this amendment or to abstain against this, unfortunately, I think they'll be doing themselves a disservice, undermining the credibility of the Green Group as our position by failing to allow us to address one key cause of carbon emissions in our city. It's something which hopefully is going to be welcomed and supported by our opposition. It's something which I'd love to be able to have a cross-council consensus on this. Unfortunately, that's not going to occur because of the objections of the Liberal Democrat group. Now, obviously, it's something where we've already undertaken a consultation. There will be further consultations. Norwich is a wonderful city in that most people live within half a mile of a park. It may not be the type of Eton Park or Waterloo Park or Wensum Park equivalent. It may be a local park very close by, but parks do not need to be accessed via car. The only residents needing to access parks via car will be disabled residents. And as part of the consultation, that's one of the things which we'll be looking at, giving free parking to disabled residents who also happen to be our poorest residents. So I hope that everyone will join the Labour group in opposing this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Fulton McAllister. Councillor Lubbock.
Amendment.
Okay. Councillor
Yes,
Lubbock.
thank you, Lord Mayor. I do think this is the wedge. Are we going to be charging for all of our parks, for parking at Mousehold and Slough Bottom and all the other parks? I think the idea of local people for local use should use local parks. These are Norwich parks, and if you live on the other side of Norwich to get hospital facilities, I'm afraid some people have to drive. This would disadvantage people who are elderly, even living in Eton, that's pretty local to Eton Park. Some people have to drive because they cannot walk the perhaps 2 miles from one side of Eton to Eton Park. I mean, I think you've just got to get real about this. Other people go to the park to actually exercise, so they might take their croquet. They might carry their croquet sticks and balls. Other people might go there to play pitch and putt, which is a very thriving facility. They pay for their pitch and putt, and now they have to pay for 3 hours parking, which might they don't play pitch and putt anymore. So we would be putting people off who will come and use the park, use the facilities. This is the wrong time to do this. I mean, people have taken their local parks to heart. They've enjoyed the use of them, and we've seen people exercise more than other time. And I think it's just the wrong time to introduce this punitive measure. It hasn't been thought through. You haven't talked their £400,000 scheme for South Park Avenue, which missed from that road to allow the 25 bus to pass. You just haven't consulted with the people of Eton, and if you have consulted with some groups like the Friends of Eton Park, their response has been, this hasn't been thought through. You haven't communicated what you're trying to do. It's been poorly thought through. You've got to go back and think again. So I do think that this is a very good measure at this particular time, impacting mostly on people who have to drive to the park for one reason or another. But they might be elderly, they might be a family having 3 children. How do you get 3 young children to the park without a car? 3 children under 5 to the park without a car. I'd like to know how you do that. This is just, it hasn't been thought through. It's punitive at this particular time, at a time when measures are going on for some months yet to so that people are restricted in the use of other areas and being able to travel further afield. So I think it's been very poorly thought through, and I hope that some people will know this is not the right time. Let's put it on hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buck. Any other councillors? No? Okay. Councillor Stutley. Councillor Giles. Okay.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I believe that parking charges here will discourage car usage, so I don't see why that would be a reason to abstain or vote in favour of this amendment. So I oppose the amendment. And luckily, Eton is quite well off for open spaces across the whole of the ward. So there are alternatives for people in Eton. And also, I live close to this park myself, and I'm content that the consultation in place was thorough, and that the mitigation exercise will enable this to go ahead without a serious impact on the local community. And I will input into that consultation and that process myself, and I'll certainly encourage my neighbours to do so. But I'm comfortable with this and not in favour of this particular amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm actually very disappointed that this amendment has been brought, and I appeal to those Green councillors who are currently undecided to vote against this amendment. One of the fantastic things about living in Norwich is that we have so many parks and green spaces all over the city. within walking distance wherever you are. In my ward alone, got Heartsease Rec, Alderman Walker Park, Pilling Park, Valley Drive Park, Mousehold Heath, Kett's Cave, Kett's Heights just outside, Lionwood. I mean, the only realistic alternative to imposing these car parking charges would be selling off some of these other parks and green spaces in more deprived areas of the city. But the Liberal Democrats don't want to be honest about that when they bring this amendment. They instead suggest that we should draw down further on our reserves in order to not have to generate this additional income. This additional income will primarily be generated from those outside the city who are not contributing to the payment of our services through paying council tax, like so many of our residents are, most of our residents are in the city itself. If we do draw down on our reserves so we don't have to introduce these charges, we'll have to introduce additional cuts to public services that the most deprived residents rely upon in the next few years. So I'm really disappointed this amendment's been brought, and I'm also disappointed that the Liberal Democrat group haven't been honest about what the alternative is if this isn't pursued. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Giles. Any other councillors wish to contribute? No. Okay. Councillor Wright, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I think we have been honest, just picking up on that last point, that we're asking for a 1-year hiatus for additional work to be carried out. And we've heard the financial arguments about why this amendment should not be passed, but this is a political, not a financial decision. I'm confused listening to Labour about if this is a financial or environmental proposal. Councillor Fulton McAllister talks about the detail of the consultation, but why was none of this information at scrutiny when I asked? Why did the County Council's Transport for Norwich manager know nothing about it when I met with him the day after the scrutiny meeting? Lib Dem-controlled Chelmsford Council have a similar scheme as part of their budget this year, but the big difference is that they have detail of how the scheme will work at the pre-budget stage. Picking up on Councillor Stonnard's point, Chelmsford have explained to residents that their existing parking permits database will be used to give Chelmsford's residents parking, whereas those from outside the area will have to pay each time. Now, this doesn't make it universally popular, but at least there is some detail covering what is planned at the outset and some honesty that actually this is a scheme to bring in money, and I think probably in the case of Eaton Park, to bring in money for those people who live across the water in Cringleford and further into South Norfolk, rather than those residents from closer by who have, for whatever reason, no other mechanism to get there. So I'm disappointed that others feel that they can't back this amendment, but I think for what is a relatively small amount of money from reserves, which has been signed off by the Section 151 officer, we could have put a 1-year hiatus on this scheme to allow far more detailed work to be carried out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. We'll now move to the recorded vote on the amendment.
Hello all. Okay, so we're voting either for, against or abstaining on the amendment. So if I call your name, can you unmute and then mute straight afterwards? Ackroyd?
For.
Bergline?
Against.
Brocheck Colson?
Against.
Button?
Against.
Carlo?
Against.
Driver?
Against.
Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister?
Against.
Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister?
Against.
Giles?
Against.
Graham?
Against.
Harris?
Against.
Huntley?
Against.
Kendrick,
Against.
Lubbock,
For.
Maguire,
Against.
Manning,
Against.
Maxwell,
Against.
McCartney Gray,
Against.
Neil,
Abstain.
Oliver,
Against.
Osborne,
Against.
Packer,
Against.
Peake,
Against.
Price,
Against.
Ryan,
Against.
Councillor Mike Sands,
Abstain.
Councillor Sue Sands,
Against.
Samaisi,
Against.
Stannard,
Against.
Stuteley,
Against.
Councillor Vaughan Thomas,
Against.
Councillor Vivian Thomas,
Against.
Councillor Waters,
Against.
Councillor Wright,
For.
and Councillor Youssef.
Against.
And Councillor Smira, sorry.
Yeah, against.
Sorry.
So, can we now same on? Okay. Okay, that amendment has fallen. Okay, move to Amendment 2. Upon Councillor Osborne to move the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This Green Budget Amendment is based on three principles that of representing residents' daily concerns, which are raised with us as ward councillors. It's based on mitigating austerity as far as we can, and it's based on addressing the climate emergency. And these are all interlinked, but I want to start with an example of the first. Residents have repeatedly requested that the council deals with fly tipping. They've done that through scrutiny, through ward councillors, through writing to cabinet members, through constant reporting. Last year, Green councillors put forward a motion that received unanimous support with the solution of free monthly curbside collections, but nothing has happened since then. I would therefore ask this council to fulfil that promise, and that's what this Green Budget Amendment is proposing, that we fulfil that promise to residents and actually invest in a solution to fly tipping. And it's not only that residents need and deserve this, it would also save money for the council by avoiding us having to repeatedly pick up fly tipping. And there's no better time to do that change than when services are coming back in-house. A second principle of our budget amendment is about responding to the desperate conditions of continued austerity and insecure housing. And Councillor Harris spoke earlier in the corporate plan about the council's efforts to provide more housing, which I fully applaud. And likewise, I endorse Councillor Harris's comments about the Pathways programme. But Councillor Harris also acknowledged how stretched the council's housing teams are. And when furlough and the eviction bans, when they end, there'll be more and more people at risk of homelessness. And that's why we're proposing an additional tenancy support officer, so that we're ready to meet that need and to provide essential support to tenants who are at risk of being evicted. And because preventing homelessness also means financial savings further down the line, that additional post could be funded through investor save reserves. So it's sort of no-brainer, I think. And a final point that I want to make is that Green councillors would use investor save reserves also to fund a specialist officer who would bring in additional income through renewable energy investments. And this goes well beyond the £1.5 million in government funding for retrofitting that we've recently received. There's great potential to use alternative sources of finance, such as PWLB borrowing, community municipal investment bonds, commercial investment reserves, or other sources of finance to invest in renewable energy and bring in more income, if only the council was committed to finding those potential investments. And if we'd started doing that, investing in renewable energy, when Green councillors had first suggested it, as councils like Warrington, York, West Suffolk, and South Cambridgeshire, and many others have done and are still doing, we would now have a sustainable source of finance at the same time as helping to reduce carbon emissions. But Labour councillors have repeatedly dismissed this idea, instead clinging on to an outdated mindset that commercial investments means buying the kinds of out-of-town property that we are now stranded with, and that contribute nothing to the societal and environmental well-being of people in Norwich. So we need to make the most of the opportunities of this sector through an expert investment officer. It's well past time the council took that idea seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Price.
The Green Group's amendments come from our engagement with residents and our desire to develop pragmatic solutions that put people and the planet first. The proposed street sweeping pilot scheme could solve a problem that really shouldn't exist if the council took the time to look at service delivery from the ground up. Residents of Beatrice Road and King Street have consistently raised the issue of road flooding due to grates and gutters blocked by autumn leaves. It's logical to both them and me that the council should undertake additional sweeps on steep roads with lots of trees and little open land so that the leaves are removed before the grates become blocked, rather than carrying out remedial work to clear the blocked drains. Currently, residents' homes are under the constant threat of flooding caused by heavy downpours. Rainfall is becoming more intense as the climate changes, and adaptation is necessary. The Green Group's request for an extension to the hours that CCTV cameras are monitored in the city is supported by nearly all local residents impacted by antisocial behaviour. CCTV makes residents feel safer, and this should not be underestimated. Residents report to Green councillors a noticeable reduction in antisocial behaviour when CCTV is introduced, for example in Barnard's Yard, and the opposite when cameras are removed, such as in the Rosary Road area in Thorpe Hamlet. Recently, this council spent a considerable sum of money on replacing our CCTV cameras, only to leave them unmonitored for large periods. This decision undermines their use and ultimately the investment. At a scrutiny meeting attended by the Police and Crime Commissioner, the police spoke about the virtues of CCTV monitoring and how it provides real-time support as they combat crime and antisocial behaviour. Simply put, greater monitoring of our CCTV cameras will save the council money in the long run. Norwich is blessed with some wonderful open spaces. However, many are under constant threat from development or their importance is disregarded. They are often isolated from one another with huge urban deserts separating them, resulting in the collapse of ecosystems. I have previously requested that this council carries out a biodiversity audit to calculate the value of what we still retain and where we could make improvements. The council refused. A Friends of the Earth report from September last year indicated that much of Thorpe Hamlet and Mancroft are in the most deprived category nationally for access to open spaces for local residents. We have all seen how important outside space has been during the pandemic for both mental and physical well-being. We need to change the current approach. The protection of biodiversity needs to become a corporate priority, and the current environmental strategy shockingly makes no commitment to protecting or enhancing biodiversity. This amendment is the first step in making that change before it becomes too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Now I'd like to call on other councillors who wish to contribute. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Well, obviously, in regards to specific proposals, I shall leave Councillor Maguire and Councillor Packer to deal with those because they are obviously their cabinet responsibilities. But as the cabinet member for resources, I really need to say one or two words. First of all, once you spend reserves, they've gone. You can only spend them once. So what we would do by raiding the reserves like this is ensure further cuts in the next year or the year after that of a similar level. We are talking about £250,000. That's a lot of money. So it's not a question of voting against austerity. What it actually would be voting in favour of austerity in 2 or 3 years' time. Now, I've been the cabinet member for resources for about 4 years now, and I've had 4 budgets. And each time we've had the Green Party put forward proposals. They would have stopped us investing in the capital portfolio we have, and also various other amendments. And we certainly, had we taken any of those, we would not be in the find and sound financial position we are now to protect our services. Where I disagree very strongly with Councillor Osborne is that our out-of-town investments haven't produced nothing. They produce hundreds of thousands of pounds to protect our services. How can it be said that they are producing nothing? Now, I say I leave it to my cabinet colleagues, Councillor Maguire and Packer, indeed others as well, Labour members as well, to deal with specific items. But this is an amendment that would create austerity in the future, and it is to be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Packer.
Wait a minute, not all the Greens have spoken.
Sorry?
Well, not all. Several other Greens, myself and.
I've just Councillor Packer. I've just asked to contribute.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to begin by highlighting to Councillor Osborne that our investment strategy has enabled us to continue to protect services such as our parks, on which we have an annual spend of over £2 million. Now, I'm more than happy to work with any councillors who share a desire to improve the city's biodiversity. I would, though, have liked to have received more details about this amendment before being able to commit to a 20,000 spend, given the huge financial pressures we face. So how the 20,000 was arrived at, and not a higher or lower sum necessarily being needed. So as things currently stand, I'm afraid I cannot vote for this amendment tonight. What I would say, though, is that biodiversity strategy is being developed. And part of that process will involve reviewing and examining different options to protect and improve the city's biodiversity. This will also interlink with neighbouring district councils and provide, as part of it, opportunities to lever in much needed resources. I'm therefore hopeful that we can make a real practical progress on this issue. So with this in mind, and with this hopeful reassurance, should Councillor Osborne choose to remove this amendment, then I would be more than happy to work with him on this strategy to aid its fruition into reality. However, whatever his decision tonight, I do thank him for this amendment, which I know is moved in the spirit of genuinely wanting to radically improve our environment. Now, regarding the amendment about the playground surfaces, investing in our playgrounds is something which we are committed to and continue to do. One example of this is the surface replacement to the Bowers Avenue playground that will take place. Crucially, this will be done using external funding and is taking place due to severe vandalism. Having spoken with officers, there is limited evidence of vandalism over the last 10 years at either of the two parks in Nelson Ward that this amendment refers to. But I'm sure the Green Party councillors in Nelson would have reported any vandalism had it taken place. So if this issue is about replacing our playgrounds, which currently have sand surfaces, I feel that we need to take a more joined up citywide approach to the matter, rather than focus on two parks in one ward. This is particularly true as 37 of our 68 playgrounds have sand surfaces. So I want to make sure that our financial decisions are evidence-based. And so as someone who takes his children to parks every week across our city, I appreciate how important they are for our communities. I think it would be a fairer and more appropriate approach if we were to explore available external sources of funding, so that works such as this could take place across our city, rather than in one ward of the party who have submitted this amendment. So based on these reasons, I'm afraid I cannot vote in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor Packer. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I thank the proposers for the suggestions. I appreciate the strength of feeling they have on these important issues. The Tory Council's increase in recycling charges hasn't helped fly tipping. They passed the buck to us as a district council. I should point out as a principle, we should not talk of fly tipping services. Fly tipping is a crime. We clear up after the crime. It is not a service for criminals. 15,000 will buy something. It's not clear what, however. But our taking back of the service into direct control through our new directly owned company allows us to update our approaches to our services by technologies, scheduling and management to make it more responsive. The performance of the company will be monitored from day one by making and sharing best practice within and beyond county. We'll make sure we're getting the best value from the company. As part of our service plan for the coming year, councillors will be kept up to date on progress. These changes, which I know the councillors from the Green Party would fully support, will give us rather more than 15,000 spent in an unspecified manner. On this basis, I would urge colleagues at present to vote against this amendment this evening. The savings due to the new methods of working with up-to-date planned vehicles, including road sweepers and equipment, along with careful scheduling, many of these have been suggested by the workers themselves, will also remove the need to spend an additional 25,000 specifically devoted to sweeping leaves. Why spend the money twice? I would therefore urge colleagues to vote against the final amendment as well. The Energy Investment Office is a good idea, which is why I'm pleased to remind Council we've appointed a SALEX liaison officer who will do this kind of work. I know this will be warmly supported by all councillors who rightly wish to see this opportunity fully explored. Given we've got a new officer now in place, we don't need to spend twice. And on this basis, I would urge colleagues to reject this amendment this evening. It wasn't clear what the Green Party meant by additional tenancy support officer, because most of this would have been funded by the HRA and they put the GRA as the source. I thought for a moment they were talking about the ASB system, which is has been restructured and will have a much greater number when fully recruited. The CCT amendments, well, Councillor Osborne might be unaware of how much we've spent on the CCTV, setting them up over $500,000, along with demountables, all linked into one system. Staff watch live footage at busy times. Norfolk Police have access to recorded footage and from time to time ask for it, and we provide it. We continue to offer Norfolk Police 24/7 active access to the cameras. We work closely with the police, the PCC for Norfolk, for them to fulfil their responsibilities and duties and contribute to this fantastic service. They welcome partnership working and will see their benefits. With this in mind, I can recommend that we do not vote against this amendment for the evening. I again want to thank the movers of the amendments, their unquestionable desire to see things change, to see improvements, but you'll see we've got these covered. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Maguire. Councillor Carlo, you indicated earlier? Thank you.
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Yes, I wish that I'd been able to speak before Councillor Packer. It would have been preferable that all the Green councillors' comments on our amendments could have been heard first of all. But I would like to elaborate on the budget amendment for replacing the sand at Giro Place Playground in West Pottergate. In 2019, the local Residents Association raised with me the problem of broken glass and worse in the sand, posing safety risks to children. Unfortunately, people with bottles of alcohol sit in the playground of an evening or worse, and the bottles get broken and the glass scattered around. So I advise the residents to check the sand twice a day for a month and record any rubbish. I passed the collected information to the council and requested replacement of the sand by a safer surface. In an email dated the 6th of November 2019, the City Council agreed to do the work and said, "We are currently waiting for a final quote to come in from a contractor. This will then need to be finally authorised and the works will be programmed to take place. The Council has not progressed the work nor answered any follow-up inquiries." I'm very sorry to hear that officers haven't advised the Labour Cabinet member, and in fact Bower Avenue has obviously gone first of all, even though it's a more recent request. Parents should not be put in a position of worrying about their children's safety when they go to the local playground. Parents in the Edinburgh Road area have also requested replacement of the sand in the neighbourhood play area, and I also took this up with the council in 2019. The council offered to increase the number of NORS inspections from 2 to 3 per week, but this hasn't solved the problem of unsavoury deposits, hence my amendment tonight. But in particular, I hope that one of the Labour members now will accept, and in fact the council did promise to add the Giro Place Playground to its work programme in 2019, and will actually vote for this particular amendment tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlo. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There is much that is interesting and perhaps to support from what Green colleagues have proposed here this evening. But unfortunately, I have to agree with what's been said already, and there is a lack of detail. So I will struggle to support and vote in favour, because I just don't know what the sort of what these proposals look like in practice. It would be good, actually, I think, to have had the opportunity to maybe pre-scrutinise this full budget amendment, so that we could come to a detailed decision. But so I'll be abstaining on it this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just want to pick up on one point that Councillor Osborne made, and I know it's the recommendation for an additional tenancy support officer is made with the best intentions, and I thank you for that, because the department, you know, is having an increase in cases that they're having to deal with. But as I have regular updates from the Housing Options Manager, regular conversations, and I think at this present time, if more staff are needed, that will go through partly through the directors and the manager of the service. To just sort of pick one thing out in isolation doesn't necessarily help with the overall picture. So if more staff are needed within that department, a business case would be put forward, and it would be up to the director and the manager to make the case and move it forward. So thank you for your concern for the staff. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any others wish to indicate? Councillor Stutley. Councillor Stutley, yes. I'm not on mute, am I? No, I'm not on mute. Councillor Stutley.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can do now, yeah, away you go.
Thank you, my connection is poor. Sorry. Yeah, I can't support these amendments as they stand, but just specifically on the fly tipping amendment, Councillor Osborne will know that fly tipping is an ongoing problem in Town Close, and I may well be the one councillor that reports more than any other through our forms. But we've had some successes by working with residents in the ward, and I'd be very willing to meet up with Councillor Osborne in a Zoom call and discuss and share ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stutley. Any other councillors indicate? Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I appreciate the good intention in the amendments brought by the Green Party, but unfortunately I simply cannot support them. Some of these amendments are the same ones trotted out every year, which I suppose means at least the Green Party living up to their recycle credentials in recycling amendments each year. But the answer is not to employ additional staff unless, as Councillor Harris has already pointed out, there is a demonstrable need. I know that our senior and intermediate officers have a record and a history of redeploying staff within the departments on a needs basis in response to changing conditions. And so for these reasons, I simply cannot support the Green Party amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Mike Sands. Any other councillors wish to indicate? No. Okay. Councillor Osborne, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I'm quite surprised to hear a number of Labour councillors saying that they don't understand the amendments, because, you know, as Councillor Sands just mentioned, a lot of these are things that we have suggested throughout the year, and as Councillor Carlow highlighted in relation to the Giro Place play area, these are things that, you know, that have come up in our ward work and you know, that we've been advocating for on behalf of residents throughout the year. So I think Labour councillors should be aware of and understand these issues. I'm just going to take the points that were raised sort of in order. So Councillor Kendrick talked about the use of reserves. We're using the invest to save reserves. Councillor Kendrick, what would you do? Would you make those save to not spend reserves? that's what we're using these for, to generate more income for the council or to create savings. And I'd also point out that the commercial investments that the council has made in properties have required creation of additional reserves as a sort of risk buffer for when those properties fail to produce an income, as they have done during COVID. The biodiversity corridors, Councillor Packer, you mentioned that the biodiversity strategy is being written. This council will remember that Councillor Bogerline proposed a motion on the biodiversity emergency in September 2019, about a year and a half ago. I just have to let my cat in. And the biodiversity strategy hadn't been updated since 2002 until Councillor Bogerline suggested that, and we've still not received that biodiversity strategy. So, the council's dragging its heels on this emergency. On playground, I think Councillor Carlo has covered that, but just to reiterate that this is about the council fulfilling the promises that it makes to residents. On fly tipping, we're asking for an officer to scope the work that would need to be done to ensure that fly tipping can be dealt with more efficiently when services are brought back in-house, whether that is through additional community skips or monthly curbside collections. And in response to Councillor Stuteley's point, I would just remind councillors that Labour councillors on this council voted to abandon or postpone, but several times postpone the scrutiny task and finish group that was meant to be looking at examples of fly tipping. And let me assure Councillor Stuteley that I also speak to residents almost on a daily basis about fly tipping. But I would be happy to meet with you and talk about it. The tenancy support officer, I'm surprised to hear that Councillor Maguire doesn't know what that is, given that it's in his service area or within his portfolio. But it's about and this is based also on speaking to the service and knowing and understand. We also speak to officers and get a sense of what's needed, and also about looking ahead to the end of furlough, the end of the eviction ban, when we are likely to see increase in homelessness, unfortunately. A final point, which is about the CCTV. Councillor Maguire will remember, talks about close partnership working with the police. You may remember Councillor Maguire meeting with the police at the Duke Street Baptist Church in December 2019, where the police explicitly said that they would value more CCTV, and this hasn't materialized. And as Councillor Price highlighted, the fact that we've spent, I think it was £250,000 on additional CCTV cameras, and now we're not monitoring them enough. It just defeats the object of it. So to sum up, I would say that these amendments are based on conversations with officers. They're based on the ward work that we receive as councillors, where we believe that there is improvements that can be made in the council services. And I've noticed that that Labour councillors were accepting the spirit of these amendments. So be brave and let's do it.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. We'll now move to the recorded vote on the amendment.
Ackroyd.
Abstain.
Bogerline.
For.
Brocheck Coulton.
Against.
Button.
Against.
Carlo. Carlo.
For, beg your pardon.
Driver.
Against.
Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister.
Against.
Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister.
Against.
Giles.
Against.
Graham.
For.
Harris.
Against.
Huntley.
Against.
Kendrick. Councillor Kendrick.
come in.
Sorry for that. Slight technical problems. Against. Can you hear me?
Councillor,
Against?
yep, thank you. Councillor Lubbock,
Abstention.
Maguire,
Against.
Manning,
Against.
Maxwell,
Against.
McCartney Gray,
Against.
Neil,
For.
Oliver,
Against.
Osborne,
For.
Packer. So was that Packer?
Against.
Peake,
Against.
Price,
For.
Ryan,
Against.
Councillor Mike Sands,
Against.
Councillor Sue Sands,
Against.
Councillor Samaisi,
Against.
Councillor Schmierer,
For.
Stannard,
Against.
Stuteley,
Against.
Councillor Vaughan Thomas,
Against.
Councillor Vivian Thomas,
Against.
Councillor Waters,
Against.
Councillor Wright,
Abstain.
Councillor Youssef.
For.
Okay. Okay, well that's fallen. So we'll go back to the substantive item. I'd like to invite group spokespersons or spokesperson. Councillor Bergerline.
Thank you. Just give me a second. So I would first of all like to take the opportunity to thank officers for their work on this budget at a time when new elements and considerations have been thrown at them almost weekly. This year, the budget truly was a mammoth undertaking, and we are very lucky to have a team that really lived up to that challenge. There is a lot that is positive in this budget, like the fact that we will be building new council homes for Norwich, or the additional investment that has been awarded by the government to support carbon reduction. The Labour administration would probably say that this is a budget of investment and not a budget of cuts, but I don't buy that. Reductions in financing for neighbourhood projects are cuts. Employment freezes do mean that no woman is made redundant, but it also means less jobs in Norwich. I agree that therefore we need better funding for local government. I also agree that the council needs to find ways to raise extra income. But you know that I quite fundamentally disagree with how the council has gone about doing so through investments in things like cold stores and travel lodges. Now, I already hear the response from the Labour group. So what services would the Green group cut if they don't want us to invest in these things? I want to give a clear reply to this question so we can settle it once and for all. No cuts, because if this was a Green Council, we would have made investments in sustainable ventures that would by now create substantial income and would ensure that we are much further along on our path to net zero. Let's go back over a decade when a project was discussed for 5,000 solar PV on council housing. According to modelling, even low-risk financing could have realised up to 35 million of revenue over a 25-year period. Greens had called for this kind of scheme for such a long time. We would have invested in it much earlier and would have been able to realise it in time before feed-in tariffs were cut. By now, we would reap the massive benefits in terms of income, benefits for the environment, and benefits for tenants who would have to pay much less for their energy bills. We would further have used borrowing to invest in large-scale renewable energy programs and to scope opportunities in upcoming technologies such as battery storage and hydrogen fuel. Labour councillors have just voted against the Green budget amendment that would have once again generated income for the council while providing social and environmental benefits. Before Labour councillors criticise Greens for not finding ways of raising income, maybe they should have a look at the list of opportunities they have missed. In a few years' time, will we be looking back in regret again? A Green Council would have looked closely at the asset stock years ago, as we would seek any opportunity to improve the energy efficiency of our assets. Consequently, we would not be in a position where there is now a backlog of 21 million of upgrades that need to be done to the council's assets. Much more expensive because these will be reactive rather than proactive upgrades. Where would we not have wasted money we now desperately need? We would not have agreed to use SIL funding to finance big vanity road projects that do nothing to improve the future of Norwich. We would not have assumed running a housing development company is a skill that can be taken on by local government officers and inexperienced councillors, a misjudgment that has cost the taxpayer 6 million. Professional people would have been employed from the start. I would also like to highlight a related issue in relation to the budget in front of us. I strongly believe that as a council, we must invest in what we want to see flourish. This is true for our commercial investment as well as our cash, so banks and funds. So the effect any investment has needs to be a consideration alongside of how much the return is. I'm not suggesting that the other principles of yield, security and liquidity should not be considered. But in addition to this, we need to look much more carefully at what we are investing in to make sure that we invest in businesses and practices that we want to keep around, that we want to support and foster. We don't want to invest in high carbon ventures, in fossil fuels, in businesses that don't pay a decent wage, that exploit workers, that destroy the environment. We don't want to invest in business as usual, like industrial storage space for packaging. We do want to invest in low carbon technologies, in ethical ventures, in people. Currently, this is not reflected in our investment. Our investment further plays a role, a really important role, in sending a market signal about what is desirable investment. Now, the council seems to draw on very conservative investment advice. The consultancy employed for advice has signaled that while ethical cash investment opportunities are being looked at, they will be part of the portfolio they recommend in maybe 5 years' time. So that would mean we follow a slow and conservative trend. I think we should look at advice that makes us lead, that accelerates ethical investment and signals to consultancies and funds that the future lies in green and ethical investment. If we don't send that signal, who will? If we don't make it clear that investment in funds that support the fossil industry is over, who will? If we don't teach consultancies that they better find ethical investment opportunities, who will? So in summary, I think you need to start putting your money where your conscience should tell you to. Thank you. You're on mute, Lord Mayor.
Well interrupted. Right. I'd just like to ask the monitor officer to come in here, please. We're at 3 hours.
Yes, Lord Mayor, you're at the almost at the 3 hour point. You recall we started a little bit later than the 1/2 past, but at a convenient point before the 3 hours is up, the meeting will adjourn immediately unless the majority of members present vote for it to continue. So I would suggest, Lord Mayor, that it might be convenient now to ask members if they wish to extend the meeting a little longer, and if so, to take a vote on that.
Well, what can I say? Continue or not? We'll take a vote on that. Continue. The show of hands. Okay. Any against? Okay, I think we'll be continued on that basis. Okay. Now I'd like to ask some other councillors who indicated they want to get to contribute. Councillor Price.
My thanks to senior officers and the finance team in the production of this year's budget in what can only be described as the most challenging of years. I'm going to briefly speak on investment and governance. I've warned this council for a number of years about the risks of borrowing and investing public money where the generation of yield was clearly the primary goal. It was always clear to me that the loans provided by central government were never for this purpose. Due to the administration's conservative and unimaginative commercial investment policy, coupled with the haste in which Cabinet made buying decisions, we are now wedded to our investment portfolio for the long term. These investments do currently produce a return, as you would expect, but are quickly becoming a risk as the world accelerates into the future, to say nothing of the lack of consideration given to their negative environmental impacts, exasperating the climate emergency. The Greens have consistently advocated that commercial investment should bring social, ethical and environmental benefits. Greens have a viable alternative approach. We can plug the funding gap whilst improving the environment and offer the necessary flexibility required of a modern investment programme. Governance in this council is now moving in the right direction, but it will take time for these changes to embed and for the culture to evolve. We now have consultancy work from internal audit on the insourcing of the joint ventures and advice and consultancy work on commercial property investment. We also now have assurance work around Norwich Regeneration Limited to ensure governance arrangements are effective and proportionate and meet the council's objectives. If only the administration had not been so blinkered in the past, heeded the warnings Greens had raised and embraced the benefits of preemptive consultation work, the embarrassing failings of extravagant losses from housing development or the purchasing of poor long-term commercial investments would not be the problems we have to deal with today. Assessment and rationalisation of the council's assets is long overdue. With a backlog of maintenance required on these assets, we will have to spend more than is prudent to get them up to scratch or sell them cheap, another financial failing. Work regarding the council's policy framework, the review procedures of our policies is essential. The council needs assurance that this keystone, the policy framework, which underpins everything, is robust and fit for purpose. The Labour group want to be seen as the heroes of the city, but their lack of financial acumen, open democracy and vision mean that any achievements have been made in spite of rather than because of their leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I just want to talk a bit about some of the alternative sources of finance that I believe and that Greens believe that this council should be using. And we've talked about these many times before. Greens have previously raised many of these ideas, but I want to briefly outline some of what we've been calling for. And these are all based on the principles of delivering social value and being able to address the climate emergency without having to rely on so much on sporadic and inadequate government grants, although we do obviously need government to provide more funding, which is very clear. But the first example I want to talk about is the community municipal investment bonds, which we've talked about before. And this council seems set on using the excuse that it's more expensive than PWLB borrowing. But research shows that investment-based crowdfunding has the potential to provide capital on terms similar to or better than the PWLB, and that's according to the LGA, the Local Government Association. And that's also not including the benefits to the local economy that CMIBs, Community Municipal Investment Bonds, can bring. In many ways, CMIBs are a win-win-win, but the council seems to lack the vision to actually take them forward. A second example of local financing for decarbonisation specifically is to work directly with local community energy groups and energy cooperatives. The council, for example, could offer roof space for solar panels, for example, on community centres in return for cheap energy and for the associated savings. There are many examples of this, and for example, in West Suffolk. And nearly 2 years ago, the council passed a motion requiring Cabinet to present a report on how the council might develop new models of finance to support the local solar industry, but that still hasn't happened. And there doesn't seem to be the political will within the Labour group to make it happen, which is very frustrating when you think of what could be achieved if we actually access that source of expertise and finance. My third example is about the use of the council's assets. We've got a significant asset base, and we should be looking at how we can use those to deliver, to provide local jobs, local income, local social and environmental benefits, as far in sort of manifold ways. And that means taking what's a community wealth building approach, and I refer councillors to the example in Lewis or in Preston, for example, where they've really pioneered this, which is about making sure that council's partners are also able to leverage funding and finance to support the local economy, support the council service delivery at the time when we desperately need that. And all of these points are further explained in further detail in a report on green finance from the Local Government Association, which I would urge administration councillors to read if they haven't already. And I could go on with further examples, but just to finish, to say that it's very frustrating that Labour councillors have been dragging their heels on many of these ideas, or have been outright resistant when they could bring in more money, they could deliver more social value. And frankly, it's time that the council broadened its thinking and started to actively work to open up the potential of local and community-based finance.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was just looking at the HRA budget specifically. It's welcome that after 4 years of government-imposed cuts in council house rental rates, we can now make modest increases again to keep up with inflation. However, the effects of the 4-year reduction and 4-year inflation still leaves our rental income well below what it was in 2016. The result is that the city has less in its accounts to put back into repairs, upgrades, retrofitting and new social housing, all because of the Tory ideology instigated by Margaret Thatcher in her quest to destroy much needed social housing. What I am surprised about is that the garage rents will not be increased, when it would be prudent to raise them by at least the rate of inflation year on year to bring in much needed revenue with very little effort from the council. Of course, as I highlighted before, if the current embargo on renting vacant garages was lifted, then renting just 10% of those vacant ones would bring in an estimated £36,000 a year. I'm also pleased that 1.45 million is forthcoming from the government's decarbonisation scheme and green home scheme, some of which we can be used to improve the environmental standards of a small number of our council house stock. Although the funding is welcome, it comes with government conditions and timescales. Considering we have a stock of 15,000 homes, many of which need radical retrofitting to meet the environmental challenges, this small amount of funding is just a few crumbs from the government's table. If the government was serious about tackling the climate emergency, then they need to release much, much more, and not just as a one-off, but in a proper long-term financial plan. A sticking plaster will not fix, let alone heal a gaping wound. In the meantime, though, the council could at least commission a survey of its housing stock to get an understanding of what is needed and how much it would cost, rather than keep waiting for these small short-term opportunities. Many councils are way ahead of our ambitions, such as Oxford, who not only have surveyed and found out that 29% of its carbon emissions come from residential buildings, but as a consequence are planning to spend £50 million retrofitting and improving much of their council house stock. This is time for our council to step up and get serious on the environmental challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neil. Councillor Carlow.
No, thank you.
No, thank you. Oh, well, excellent. Right, okay. Councillor Stannard.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and it's really interesting to hear the Greens again recycling old arguments and, as usual, trying to make allegations around financial competence and poor governance, and there have been some inaccurate statements. And one is the completely boring, repetitive claim that the housing company has resulted in a loss to the council. And I think that reveals a basic misunderstanding of the position. Any losses which previously were made were losses to the company, and that was at a point in time. And in fact, the company is now paying down those losses quite handsomely, is in a position to make early repayments to the council, and is turning a healthy profit. So I wish some of those councillors who keep rolling out these old arguments would keep up, really, pay attention, and stop making unfair allegations of that nature. The other thing that's happened with the company is that huge improvements have been made in governance, absolutely massive improvements, having learned and developed. We're a learning organisation. And I can tell you that those of us who are closely involved have worked really, really hard to do that. And it's got absolutely nothing to do, whatever Councillor Price or others might claim, with him or any other opposition councillor. You haven't been there doing the work. A lot of it's myself and Councillor Kendrick and other members of the board who've been doing it. In addition, and finally, because we know that the Greens would have pulled the plug on the company some time ago, they would have got cold feet, and they ask us to be bold and they ask us to be ambitious and to take risks. Actually, you wanted to wind it all down early on. You got cold feet, you didn't want to continue, but we had the courage to do that. And as a consequence, we're trading profitably. And what's more, we've done something the Greens would not have delivered. We have delivered much needed housing in this city of a high quality, which is really what's needed. The Greens would have failed to do that because they would have run scared.
Thank you, Councillor Stannard. Councillor Button.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak on the housing side. I'd like to encourage all councillors tonight to support this Labour budget. In particular, I want to reinforce what Councillor Harris has said with regards to the housing element of it. Housing is a big issue for my constituents in Bowthorpe, and it's due to our budget and previous investment that the new council house is being built to the highest standard in my ward at Wayne Park. It's been a big issue for me too. I know firsthand what it's like to live in a poorly maintained, insecure and very costly private rented accommodation with a bad landlord. The evidence of this is partly damaged my health and particularly my lungs. As an older person living through the COVID-19 pandemic, I've reflected on it several times. Fighting the scourge of landlordism is one of the reasons I became a Labour member many years ago. I'm now fortunate to be a council tenant. I know, therefore, like many do in this chamber, what good quality, secure, well-maintained and socially rented housing is like and the difference it makes, together with democratic control over your landlord. It means to a large extent freedom from fear, and I would challenge anyone to put a price on that. This budget not only invests in the nuts and bolts of bettering our housing stock through new kitchens, bathrooms, roofs, boilers, etc., but also provides the resource to build hundreds of more urgently needed homes in our city. It is a budget of choices, and all good politics, in my view, should be about the choices you choose to take as a politician. You can't do everything, so you need to learn to prioritise. So, Lord Mayor, our choice tonight is to keep investing, ramp up building new homes, and expand our housing services as a city so we can protect our residents, give housing choice and better lives to our constituents. You should all be proud of that and have the confidence to vote for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Button. Councillor Waters.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Every time I listen to Councillor Price, I hear the voice of the Secretary of State, Robert Jenrick. He shares so much in common with him when it comes to investing in sound assets that help to support our budget. And I know Councillor Osborne is particularly keen to call a point of order, which I suspect will be something in the order of the Greens have never been opposed to the developments at Rain Park. They've never said those things. It just brings to mind an image I have of a leaflet which I was given a copy of, and it's of two rather angry men in yellow high-vis jackets standing outside the entrance to Rain Park, apparently berating each other. But the context is, do not buy properties here. This is a terrible investment. And, you know, I just wondered if the intention was to try and bring down the value of those properties, those much needed properties, those successfully developed properties. And I've been watching unicorns dance across the screen as the inflated ambitions and aspirations around. I remember this actually, a very speculative green proposal, which I remember our 151 officer worked his way through and said it would probably cost us £50 million to put this in place. So, there is a kind of Greenland far away, but as you get closer to it, you kind of understand that the foundations of it are not often very well developed. And I know my colleague, Councillor Kendrick, has spent time with Councillor Osborne looking at green bonds in Woking. But, you know, really, we are doing significant amounts of work, and our investment is always for a social, economic, environmental purpose. And I have to say, you know, it's pretty disappointing that a budget in the teeth of a really hostile government and 10 years of austerity, and that we are championing these values. And I said to you right at the beginning of the meeting that we're at the fork in the road, and it's time that people took sides about whether they want a continuation of neoliberalism and propping up some of those arguments, or come onto the side of democratic socialism and make sure that we build a better future for all citizens. And this budget does that.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. A point of order has been raised.
I think that was me, Lord Mayor. I'm not sure if it's actually a point of order, but I think Councillor Waters addressed it. He also acknowledged that Green councillors have never opposed Norwich Regeneration Limited. We've simply questioned the governance of it and made, questioned whether it's actually being governed effectively.
Okay. Is that dealt with then?
Well,
yeah.
if it stops being.
As far as you're concerned, okay. Is that the same as yours, Councillor Neil? Councillor Neil?
Well, no, it was the same subject. Councillor Waters made a statement that Councillor Price and myself were trying to drive down the prices at Rains Park, which I find very scurrilous. And if he could give me the proof and the facts, I'm sure my lawyer would love to go over it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Can we move to Councillor Schmierer, who's raised a point who wants to speak?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I would like to turn our attention to the council tax rise of 1.99%. Now, I understand the need for councils like Norwich to do so in order to plug the continuing holes in their budgets, but it further exacerbates the already deeply unfair nature of local government taxation. 2% may sound modest, but when inflation is 0.8% and average wages have only risen because so many low-paid jobs have been lost over the last year, and it is estimated that unemployment will hit 2.6 million this year, the annual council tax bill and the associated rise can and does unfortunately affect many household budgets significantly. While I am delighted, as we have already heard, that Norwich has maintained its exemplary council tax reduction scheme, this does not compensate for the inherently unfair and regressive nature of council tax more widely. And this is something that must be reviewed if councils are to have a viable future in a post-pandemic Britain. Indeed, as I said, that 2% increase exacerbates the fundamental iniquities in a system which sees residents in some of the poorest cities pay far higher rates than their compatriots in some of the country's richest boroughs and neighbourhoods. So I'll give you an example here. A Band D property in Norwich currently pays £1,948 a year, whereas in the affluent London boroughs of both Wandsworth and Westminster, a Band D property is liable for less than £800 a year. Lord Mayor, we cannot go on with a system that sees councils like ours having to cut services each year while residents keep having to pay more. The government has to simply come up with a fairer system that works for all. And in response to a point Councillor Kendrick made, I think we need to look beyond simply adding a couple of bands onto the current system. Now, I understand the reluctance of governments over the last 30 years to look at this issue, because the last time the local government funding was reviewed, the so-called poll tax, it led to riots in the streets and indirectly to the end of the Thatcher premiership. However, this was because an imperfect system was being replaced by an even more imperfect system, and people simply saw it for what it was. Today, there are many tried and tested alternatives to council tax which have been successfully implemented across the world. from a local income tax to what would in honesty be my preference, namely a land value tax. And the idea of a land value tax is not new, nor is it based on some kind of radical ideology plucked from the pages of Marx or Engels. No, in fact, its advocates have included the likes of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, hardly cheerleaders for revolution or socialism, quite the opposite, in fact. Under a land value tax, a tax burden would rightly fall on landowners in proportion to the value of their holdings and would be a progressive measure as the ownership of this land is highly correlated with overall wealth and income. So if we are to build back better, as the now cliched slogan goes, then we must build back fairer and move away from propping up neoliberalism, which I'm surprised that Councillor Waters accused the Green Group of. One of the essential caveats of this building back fairer should include a fundamental overhaul of the way local government is funded so that residents in cities like Norwich can continue to access the services and amenities they expect and deserve. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Good timing. Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to reiterate Councillor Button's comments concerning the new homes in our ward of Bothorn, namely in 3 Score, commonly known as Rain Park. There are some lovely homes there, and before the lockdown I had the privilege of having a guided tour through safety mask, I might add, through a display home, and I recently drove past the development and could see some new homes being erected, which looked very, very impressive indeed. I'm looking forward to having a look through these new homes when they come close to completion. Councillor Schmierer raised some important points, which I suspect are directed at the government in Westminster, cutting the revenue support grant, which can be thought of as local government's share of the total tax take. We all know that they want to cut the revenue support grant back to zero and put the onus on local authorities in raising funds through business rates, which in the current climate isn't going to happen. And of course, there's a lack of commitment by Westminster to any fairer funding formula. And these are the real issues. And these are the things which I believe not merely Norwich City Council, but councils, authorities all over the country need to address by forming massive pressure groups, almost a form of federalism, and lobbying and opposing the government in Westminster for their unfair taxation through council tax and other sorts of things like this.
Thank you, Councillor Mike Sands. Any other councillors wish to contribute? Oh, Matthew Bolton McAllister.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So Councillor Smith has raised an important point about the need to reassess the system that we use to fund local government. However, we do have to deal with the political reality of where we are. And he's suggested that it's disappointing that we are increasing council tax by 1.99%. And I'd like to invite him to make an amendment to the budget if he feels so strongly about it and highlight what he'd cut.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to contribute? No, Councillor Stewtley. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, I support this budget, and it's curious tonight that we've heard that City Council is responsible for the lack of public transport to parks, antisocial behaviour, council tax increases, the climate emergency and fly tipping, but we're not responsible for sustained excellent financial management, which this budget represents, and I fully support it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stewtley. Any other councillors wish to come in? Night is yet young. No. Ah, right. Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Well, I realise that after 3.5 hours, members would not be too pleased if I went on for too long. And furthermore, my bus leaves in 18 minutes, so I promise you I won't be going on for too long. But there are just 1 or 2 points I have to answer in regard to what the Green Council said. First of all, I'll start with the nice end. Councillor Samira makes some reasonably good comments. I entirely agree, of course, with Councillor Matthew McAllister. It's at the end of the day, yes, while one doesn't like increasing council tax by 2%, what is the alternative? As to the wider reform of local government, I think he and I, against Councillor Samir and I, are entirely agree. I totally agree with him. We do need a radical change. And while I suggested that there should be added a ban to the top end of council tax, at least that would be an improvement, although I agree with Councillor Chair, I'd like to go further. Now I'm going to have to be a little bit less kind to some of the other Green councillors. Councillor Osborne in particular makes a few throwaway remarks that I really do need to pick up on. In his wind-up speech on his amendment, he sort of said, well, we have to have this reserve because sometimes, you know, this year, for example, our commercial investments haven't performed. Well, actually, of our new commercial portfolio, we've actually collected 85% of the rental value. That is actually quite remarkable, considering that there are major property holding companies in the private sector who are struggling to get it even up to 60%. So they've actually performed very well. And of course, I can only say this yet again, that the proof is that these commercial property acquisitions produce hundreds of thousands of pounds, which are protecting the services. And that is shown by how successful we are in protecting our services, unlike so many other councils. Now, when Councillor Bogerline talks about the belief that somehow the Bank of Green Unicorns would have produced a vast amount of additional income beyond that, well, the difference is you can go on the internet and find no end of people who claim that they will, if you invest with them, you'll make far more money. What we have done is we have actually proved that we've made successful investments, not just sort of some magical, we could have done even better sort of story. At the end of the day, it's sort of said that, well, it's a bit boring, you know, rather conservative, the idea that we should be concerned about yield. We should instead go for social good, but actually yield is important because the investments we do have in our commercial properties produces the income that we can use to protect our vital council services. And that in itself is socially good. So at the end of the day, one can actually compare, on the one hand, a Labour council, which clearly has had a successful and solid success in protecting its services, unlike sadly so many other councils. On the other hand, the Bank of Green Unicorns, which sort of vaguely suggests, well, we could have done even better. Well, you know, I've seen in business, I've had a lot of people come to me and say, well, if only you take up my investment, you'll do even better. They've all usually ended up bankrupt. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. We'll now move to a recorded vote on the substantive item, which will be taken in 3 parts. The first vote will be recommendations A1 to A6. Now to the recorded vote.
Ackroyd.
Abstain.
Bogerline.
Abstain.
Coulson.
She's left. She's not well.
Button.
4.
Carlo.
Abstain.
Driver.
4.
Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister.
4.
Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister.
4.
Giles.
4.
Graham.
Abstain.
Harris.
4.
Huntley.
4.
Kendrick.
You're not be surprised, 4.
Lubbock.
Abstain.
Maguire.
A resounding 4.
Manning.
4.
Maxwell.
4.
McCartney Gray.
4.
Neil.
Abstain.
Oliver.
4.
Osborne.
Abstain.
Packer.
For.
Councillor. Peake.
For.
Price.
Abstain.
Ryan.
In favour.
Mike Sands.
For.
Sue Sands.
For.
Samaisi.
For.
Schmira.
Abstain.
Stonnard.
For.
Stuteley.
For.
Vaughan Thomas.
In favour. Yeah.
Vivian Thomas.
For.
Waters.
For.
Wright.
Abstain.
Yusuf.
Abstain.
Okay. So that's carried. We'll now move to the second vote, and which will be on recommendations A7 to A26.
Ackroyd.
For.
Bogerline.
Abstain.
Brocheck Colton. Oh, she left, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Button.
For.
Carlo.
Abstain.
Driver.
For.
Councillor Erin Fullerton McAllister.
For.
Councillor Matthew Fulton McAllister.
For.
Giles.
For.
Graham.
Abstain.
Harris.
For.
Huntley.
For.
Kendrick.
For.
Lubbock.
For.
Maguire.
For.
Manning.
For.
Maxwell.
For.
McCartney Gray.
For.
Neil.
Abstain.
Oliver.
For.
Osborne.
Abstain.
Packer.
For.
Peake.
For.
Price.
Abstain.
Ryan.
In favour.
Mike Sands.
For.
Sue Sands.
For.
Samaisi.
For.
Schmira.
Abstain.
Stonnard.
For.
Stuteley.
For.
Councillor Vaughan Thomas.
For.
Councillor Vivian Thomas. Vivian Thomas. I think you're muted.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
Councillor Yusuf.
Abstain.
That's carried. We'll go to the third vote, which is on recommendation B.
Ackroyd.
For.
Bogerline.
For.
Button.
For.
Carlo.
For.
Driver.
For.
Erin Fulton McAllister.
For.
Matthew Fulton McAllister.
For.
Giles.
For.
Graham.
For.
Harris.
For.
Huntley.
For.
Kendrick.
For.
Lubbock.
For.
Maguire.
For.
Manning.
For.
Maxwell.
For.
McCartney Gray.
For.
Neil.
For.
Oliver.
For.
Osborne.
For.
Packer.
For.
Peake.
4.
Price,
4.
Ryan,
4.
Mike Sands,
4.
Sue Sands,
4.
Samazy,
4.
Schmierer,
4.
Stonnard,
4.
Stutley,
4.
Vaughan Thomas,
4.
Vivian Thomas,
4.
Waters,
4.
Wright,
4.
and Yusuf.
4.
Okay, that's carried. Yes, that's carried too. And I'm afraid that's the end of the meeting. Thank you for your patience, and good night from me. Take care. Stay safe.